Come back and hide.
He's going to come back. He knows all the trade secrets now.
I know where all the bodies are buried.
Okay. Good evening. The Design Review Board No.1 public meeting of July 9th, 2009 is called to order. Please refrain from talking amongst yourselves during the meeting, and please turn off or put on vibrate all cell phones and pagers. If you need to talk, please leave the meeting. Anyone who wishes to speak, including applicants, is asked to completely fill out one of the speaker cards provided at the table by the front door and submit it to staff. Anyone who wishes to be re-noticed about a project must completely fill out one of the postcards provided at the table by the front door and submit it to staff to receive notice of subsequent meetings. Current Design Review Board agendas are available by calling our Design Review Board hotline at 818-548-3171 or by visiting our website at www.ci.glendale.ca.us. A handout describing the procedures of the meeting, possible board decisions, and Design Review Board reconsideration and appeals is available at the table by the front door. The chairperson may reorder agenda items at his or her discretion. Roll call. Board Member Aliano.
Here.
Board Member Ellis.
Present.
Board Member Insua.
Here.
Board Member Simonian.
Here.
Chairman Yu.
Here.
Report regarding posting of the agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on the bulletin board outside City Hall at or before 5 p.m. on July 2nd, 2009. Review of calendar. There are no cases this evening because we are having a Design Review Board study session.
I was wondering if it's okay with you if we could maybe do the resolution part of it, the thanking Brian and introducing Judy at the beginning, if we could.
I'd like to turn the meeting over to Mr. Tim Foy, the Assistant Director.
Thank you. It is my reluctant duty to introduce you a resolution which thanks Brian Ellis for his service here on the board as he attends his last meeting here. Brian has been a very faithful member of the board and has contributed a lot to the board's discussions. He's been I think as a non-architect, he has really put a special emphasis on the point of view from the homeowners, and it's brought a really good balance to the board's discussions, and one that we will definitely miss, but hopefully others of you will take that up. I would also like to commend Brian for really taking the extra step and risking life and limb by doing his own personal inspections of construction projects, including subterranean spaces. You have before you a resolution, thanking Brian, in which the board should act on.
Should I present it to him now?
You should have signed it. They all signed it?
I haven't signed.
I haven't signed it. Well, there's...
Okay.
Maybe we could take care of that right after.
I could sign mine
Maybe
now.
we should pass it around.
Thank you, Mr. Foy. And I'd actually like to thank my colleagues and welcome Judy, Ms. Palmer, to the board. I was at work the other day, and I mentioned to my staff that this would be the last Thursday that I'd be slipping out early to go to design review. And one of my associates looked at me and said, "What? You're getting fired from a volunteer job?" But you know what? I've enjoyed my time working with staff. You guys are really very good. I certainly made my life easier. And I think in the long run, the process has changed. I'll be interested to hear what happens in the study session, some of the comments that you have. It is a process that 25 years ago in a homeowner's, and actually Randy Carter, who was on Board 2's living room, we sat around and talked about starting a homeowners association because mansionization was coming into Glendale at the time. And somebody said, well, you know, they ought to have design review. And at that time, I didn't know really what that meant. So for me, it's a privilege, 20 years later, actually that was 1989, to be a part of it. And I just look to the homeowners and to the developers and say, the rules are very clear. If you follow the rules, you talk to staff, you'll have no trouble with design review. I, as an applicant in 91, came through design review, had no problems, had an architect and we followed the rules. And it's when you don't follow the rules that it becomes an issue. And I hate to look at this board, these people becoming the bad guys or staff because you don't follow the rules. And it's I'd say, talk to staff before you start your project. Find out what the rules are. But thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I'll look forward to keeping you honest on the other side of the counter.
Thank you. So from the board members, you want to present you with this, and
Do I
thank
get
you for your
a hearty hand clasp?
get a hug later, okay?
Actually, once all the board members sign it, we will be framing it, so.
Oh, well, you got it. Excellent.
But, so
No, I don't
if
get
you'd
it.
like to pass it back, we'll have it framed
You
by
get to
the
look at
end.
it.
Yeah, I got to look at it. Well, thank you.
And at this point, we'd also like to,
Ivan sign it?
Yeah, he said.
Sign it, yeah, that's that scribble on the right side.
Chairman sign it?
Lots of scribbles on
Five
there.
signatures. There you go.
thank you. We'd also like to welcome our newest member to the Design Review Board, Ms. Judy Palmer. She is a licensed landscape architect, a principal of her own landscape architectural firm, close to 30 years or more. Previous Design Review Board member. Previous member from 1990 to 1997, so she has great experience coming to our Design Review Board, and she's also been a consultant for 13 homeowners associations in terms of reviewing architectural and landscape submittals, and has sat on numerous study and design panels for the City of Glendale. So welcome. Thank you. Welcome. With that said, brings us to the main portion of our agenda, which would be the Design Review Board study session.
Thank you for coming to this sort of non-mandatory part of it, and so it's good to see all your faces. I only have 3 cards here, so is that it? No one else would like to speak or ask any questions? If you do, please fill out a card and pass it over to staff. That would be great. And should I hand it over to staff to get started on it?
I think Hassan's going to leave.
Hi, Mr. Chair. This is the second of the 2 study sessions that we are doing with each design review board. As you know, over a year ago, we started rolling out the new design review process that the City Council directed staff to start. And we thought we would, after about a year, we would come back and revisit the process as it has been taking place. In the last year, we have slowly found some glitches, and we have tried to correct certain things and fine-tune certain things to the levels that are administratively possible. But at this point, we thought it would be a good idea to sit there and sit down with you and go through the process and get your feedback as we go through each piece, in terms of some of the changes that you think we could also take to the City Council. We have some ideas of our own that we will discuss as we go through the evening tonight, and we would like to get your feedback as well. At the end of the evening, after this evening, we will compile the comments that we've received in this study session and in the previous study session, and we'll prepare a staff report to the City Council, making perhaps some recommendations for them to consider fine-tuning some of the process, maybe considering some new ideas as well. And that's the purpose of this evening. Thank you very much.
Actually, before we go on, I know that we were going to take comments towards the end of the study session, but if I wanted to open it up to see if anyone wanted to speak before we got started on it, to be able to, because I got a no and a yes and four. And just state your name and address.
My name is Glenn Webb. I live at 1670 Arbalest Drive, and I
represent the Royal Canyon Homeowners Association. And the reason I specifically asked to speak before you went, perhaps, we have a project right down the street, 2 houses down from me, 1655 Arbalest, and it's a remodel, addition of about 1,100 square feet to a house. And I was at the design review boards where this was approved. It went through several versions, changes in setbacks and retaining walls and such things, and finally was approved. And actually was approved with the agreement of most of the neighbors, myself included, and the next door neighbor uphill from this. But what has happened since then is indicative of a whole series of failures along the way. Failures of certainly failures to detect problems before they get too far to correct in an economical fashion and so forth. And what we have right now is
a house that is fully framed and fully plumbed and most of the electric in, and there's a red tag hanging on it. There's a red tag because the contractor demolished more than 50% of the project. In fact, demolished probably 95% of it. And I watch this process because I can observe this right from my front window as I sit there in the morning at breakfast. And I noticed that when they did one wave of demolition, and then they started the framing. And as they got into the framing, I saw the rafters and ceiling joists being replaced, and then there'd be another section of the wall taken out, the old lumber, and replaced with new framing, and then a new shear wall went up on the front side of the house, and around the corner, more of the framing came down, and then the ceiling joists were taken out and replaced with new ceiling joists. The rest of the roof structure was dismantled and replaced with... So basically, you have a new construction. And, of course, the original reason for calling it a remodel was that they wanted to take an extra 4 or 6 feet of the side yard uphill. They wanted to build a bigger house, basically. This is about a 3,600 square foot house. It used to be something like 2,400. And it would have clearly been more economical to scrape the house, but they would have been restricted in their uphill side yard setback and would not have been able to do what they wanted to do with the house. I know there were some compromises made along in the early part of the design process. It started out as a 2-story house a couple of years ago, and they compromised and took it back to a 1-story, so that increased the impetus for them to expand the side yard out. But anyway, what we have now is a red tag hanging there. The reason for the red tag, as I've heard from Building and Safety, is the excessive demolition. And also that was the result of several complaints from the neighbors. There are several other problems which Building and Safety would not... I've had extensive discussions with both Building and Safety and Planning. I'm told slightly different stories by both, but basically Building and Safety said that issues that came out of Design Review Board conditions are handled by the planning staff and not by Building and Safety. And so I said, well, has anybody been out to inspect those? For example, the 3 conditions that were approved, 3 conditions that were placed on the project when it was originally approved by the DRB were that the retaining wall, and there was a lot of argument and discussion about this rather large retaining wall that would be uphill from the house, was specifically not approved. Now, it wasn't disapproved, it was just not approved. In other words, the Design Review Board set it aside as an issue for some staff to deal with, unspecified, but some staff to deal with later on. There was also a specific disapproval of a fence that was to be built there on that uphill side. That was basically, they said no fence. And there was also a condition that the landscaping on the uphill side of this house was to be maintained. So immediately after that approval, the owners and architects and contractor came into engineering and to Building and Safety and got a permit for a 14-foot high retaining wall behind the property with no additional review or anything. And they proceeded then to do the excavation, build it. They removed all the landscaping that was required to be maintained by the Design Review Board, and they built a fence. And that fence is a real problem for the older couple that lives above, because what they did is they cut the dirt down this way, compacted it, they put the fence right here, and so if they want to go and maintain that landscaping, which is severely restricted, they actually have a problem, with their feet sliding down under the edge of this fence. It's actually a kind of a walking hazard. They really can't get into their side of their property.
I'm sorry, your time has expired, so if you could just wrap it up.
Okay, anyway. So, and again, talking to both Planning and Building and Safety, I am kind of unable to determine, number one, who's responsible for looking at these things and determining that it's not right. Apparently, both sides are waiting for the neighbors to call in and complain. And secondly, how this thing gets resolved. It's going to be a real serious problem for the owner, obviously. He's either going to have to remove 5 feet of the side of the house, it's newly constructed, to maintain the setback for the house as it should have been done, or come in and get a variance, which is going to involve public hearings and long delays and so forth. So I think this is probably a real interesting and good example of seeing how this matches the process and what you're planning to do with the process, kind of who's responsible for what, and seem to be a lot of issues between planning and building and safety, too, that are completely unresolved, including the fact that all the people that have called in have been unable to get answers from either side. They kind of get passed around. So I think this is a real good project to examine the process on.
Right. Thank you for bringing that to, I guess, to the board, and just so we have some real-world examples to sort of go through, and not just sort of the book knowledge that we have of how the sequence is supposed to go. So thank you for that. And as we discuss, I'm sure some of those points will come out, and we can talk about that. Is there anyone else that would like to speak before we get too far into the study session? So everyone else is okay afterwards then. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may just say that we understand the issue that was just raised, and as we go through the study session, perhaps we could couch the discussion in terms of the general problems that may arise after a design review approval has been given, and what the procedure is when the project goes sideways and does not the process, as opposed to mentioning a particular site for which we have not done a noticed public hearing. But we do understand this is not the only project that this type of problem has happened, and that is one of the topics we would like to actually discuss as part of our review tonight.
We'll talk about it in general. I got you. Thank you.
Okay, well, then to begin our study session, the first thing we'd like to do is just give a reminder to the board, and probably a reminder to most everyone in the audience, as I see a lot of familiar faces, people who are familiar with our processes here, of what were the changes in the last year that we're talking about. There was, it started with a concern among the public. It was the members of the public who brought this to, I guess, council's attention, and that they were somewhat dissatisfied with how the design review process had been working. I think there was a request and a need for greater transparency in the process overall, I'd say. And after a number of public hearings, City Council directed staff to prepare an ordinance for some changes to the zoning code, as well as just to institute some procedural changes that are not written as part of any code. To cover the kind of I'm going to call it transparency, not that things were being done in a hidden fashion, but what I mean by that is a more complete and open discussion before the board of all the things that are involved in design review standards, especially the single-family design guidelines. So we modified the format of our staff reports and took it to City Council for their review in a fashion which really covers all of the points that are commonly covered in the single-family design guidelines. We did a similar format to cover all the points that are in the commercial design guidelines. For projects in the hillside, we had the hillside design guidelines and the hillscape landscaping guidelines. Sometimes the individual points in the guidelines may not be applicable to every project, and we just say so. But it was a matter of keeping faith with the public that the guidelines that they were relying on for staff and the board to use in their review were being considered, and were being considered in a very overt and upfront fashion. So that's why the staff report format changed so much. We did make some changes to the process. Well, let me just finish with the staff report. City Council also asked staff to start making recommendations to the board of approval, not approval, or of the other kinds of actions the board may take. So that was also new. The changes to the process as written in the zoning code include some changes to preliminary design. We had kind of envisioned before the ordinance went into effect that preliminary design would be an application which people would formally apply for, and it would be carried out mostly at a staff level, although people did have the option of going to the board for preliminary design. The way it's really worked out in practice, and perhaps we need to adjust the language for the board here, is that we have always, on any kind of application, design review or any of the other permits we issue, we freely meet with property owners before they fill out a formal application. And that's actually become kind of an informal way of them to get an idea of what the board is looking for and what the standards, the guidelines call for in the neighborhood are. So the actual formal application for preliminary design has become a rare thing. And we've used it only when people have requested to come before the board for a formal preliminary review. I think, gosh, I don't know, it could be more than a handful of times it's happened in the last year between the two boards. And kind of a common misunderstanding of the board's action on preliminary design is that we actually encourage people to do preliminary design so they can early on get a feel for what the board's looking for. It was never intended that the board could keep people in preliminary design forever. So really what the board does is just give their comments, and they pass it on to final review. Now, the board passing it on to final review does not mean that the board approves of the project in any way. Certainly there's no formal approval given at all, and even your comments could be, the harshest wording you could imagine. I mean, your comments could be, don't bring back this for final design or you'll get voted down. But the board passing it on for final review sometimes, though, gets read as the board approving it. And I just want to kind of take this opportunity to dispel that notion. The board kind of has to let people go on to final design review. You're not to keep them in a preliminary design mode forever. And the other big change was in the number of reviews. Well, two more changes. And one is in the number of reviews by the board. For final review, the board has pretty much only 2 shots at it before your work is done. In the first review, you cannot deny in the first review. You can approve or you can return for redesign. In the second review, you can deny. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But anyway, that limiting the board's number of reviews is one thing. And the second larger change was that appeals from the board's decision go directly to the city council. Previously, there had been an appeals panel composed of members of both design review boards that was eliminated in its entirety. And the appeals now go directly to the city council. So I would like to move on next to a discussion of the staff reports and the recommendations provided by staff.
Thank you, Tim. Good evening, board members, chair, and Judy, our newest board member. As Tim mentioned, because of the revisions to the process, staff has taken a much more rigorous approach to the staff report writing. And prior to that, we do our best to meet with the applicant to convey to the applicant what the board's expectations are. We think of ourselves as essentially providing a bridge between the board and the applicant to really let them know, to be aware of the process and what the expectations of really neighborhood fit. And that's what we focus with our applicants. We talk to them about what the surrounding neighborhood looks like and feels like, what the overriding character is, what the development pattern is, and we always encourage a respectful design response to that neighborhood pattern and neighborhood character. For us, as we evaluate the project, that's the context of the evaluation is essentially the context of the neighborhood, and how a project should be designed is really, in our view and in the view of the guidelines, because we take our cue from the guidelines. Of course, the code has to be satisfied, but also having experience with you and Design Review Board 2, we have a fairly good and broad knowledge of what the expectations are in a variety of areas. And so we're able to relay that to the applicant. What you see in the staff reports is an analysis of how the project does then fit into the neighborhood, in the recommendations, you'll see, very often what you'll see is a recommendation for approval that's conditioned. Very rarely do we provide a recommendation without conditions because, as we've learned in planning and architecture school, everything can always be improved upon. And so what we do is say, well, yes, the project is worthy of approval, but would fit even better in the neighborhood and be of higher quality if the applicant were to propose such and such changes. Those are also based on the design guidelines and what we've heard from the board in the past. So what then, of course, we hear back from the applicants is that the city of Glendale requires such a much higher level of submittal materials. There's a higher expectation when you come do design in the city of Glendale. And, of course, we hear commentary about that in our meetings with the applicants. So what we'd like to hear from you, because you do see all the staff reports and you have a sense of how that compares to how you look at the project. What we're hoping, and we also took a little time to look at the statistics of how we're doing in relation to the board's decisions. Based on the numbers, the majority of the recommendations are in line with what the board has said, and based on what we've seen, the board very often will add conditions to the ones recommended by staff. So what we'd like to hear from you is how you think it's going, what staff can do better before you see a project, what additional materials you'd like to see in the submittal applications, and have the design review presentations, the content and the level of design, the level of analysis in the staff report. Is it meeting your expectations, and what could staff do better to help you in your very difficult decision-making process? So we can have that dialogue now. If you'd like to wait till later to come up with thoughts, however you'd like to
No, I
give
think
us
we
your
could discuss that
comments.
now. Julian, do you have anything that you'd like to
Sure,
start with you?
I can start. Thank you. You know, I have to say, I think the staff has done a really great job in the way they've handled the work, and the staff reports are very detailed, much more detailed than they used to be. The only comment that I would make, which I think could help me for sure, is that when the staff, and I know that the staff does this already, they do recommend sometimes approval, sometimes they don't, depending on what they find. I would like to say, continue doing that, but maybe be even more direct, in the sense that if you feel really strongly that a project should not be approved, I think it's good to say, staff does not recommend approval for the following reasons. That way the board is already aware that you went through all the same points that we might be having a hard time with, and we can see that because you've probably had more time to study the project than the board does because of the nature of how the projects come to us, then, you know, what you say will mean a lot, at least to me. So that's what I like to say at this point, and maybe some other things will come up as we discuss this. But
Thank you.
But generally, I think you've done a great job.
Mr. Small?
I agree as well. I think there's been a tremendous improvement in the staff reports. They're very detailed, and what I find myself doing is going through the package and visiting the property and then making some notes on the front cover of the packet. And then when I turn to the rear and the recommendations, most of the time the recommendations that have been advised by the staff end up matching the recommendations that I would have said anyway. So in that sense, the system is working, and it's a big improvement, and we certainly appreciate it. It makes our job easier. And the process that changed some months ago, might have been a year ago now, basically allowed the applicant to come in and behind closed doors, not in the view of the public and not on TV and so forth, to have one-on-one discussions with staff. And that is very important because you basically see the project progress behind closed doors, and it doesn't take the time of the staff and also time away from the public that's watching from home. And so people aren't taking time out of their busy schedules to keep on coming to a hearing to basically critique a project that has a long way to go. And so in that sense, the process is working, and we're pleased with it. And personally, I think it's a good improvement. I'm wondering if there's a way to let us know if there's been serious discussions about an aspect of the design and the applicant, whether it's the architect or the designer or the owner, has just put their foot down and said, no can do, this is what we're going to present and this is how we're moving forward. Because the difficulty that we had as a board before, in that somebody would come up and it'd be a whole family sitting there, and it's their investment, it's their property, it's very personal. And then you have the next door neighbors there, and then you have the engineers and so forth. And there's just a lot of emotion there in the room. And it's very difficult, I think, for us board members to look at the designer and say, you don't know what you're doing. You basically have no business designing this. We're trying to tell you what to do, but you're just not getting it. And there's those situations. I mean, we just beat around the bush and we tell them in maybe not so direct manner, but it's difficult to do it on the air. It's difficult to do it personally when everyone's watching. It's just somewhat unprofessional and perhaps rude to do. And so that's where I think the process that's behind closed doors really helps. And if there are the circumstances where, that brick wall has been hit, I think it'd be interesting for us to know, because then we wouldn't spend an hour talking about a project. We would just say, this, we could make a million recommendations which staff has already made and for whatever reason has been denied and not taken seriously, let's say. And so we would just say, very quickly, in a matter of 10 minutes, just return for redesign, because we already know that there's been this kind of dialogue. And I think that's where the difficulty gets up here, is because we're asked to provide direct feedback, and it's hard to design a project because sometimes the whole base is wrong. Everything about it is wrong. It's just wrong. It's just been started in an incorrect manner, and the massing and the location on the site is wrong. So it's hard to try to fix it. And so we could give conditions, but then sometimes the conditions get so lengthy, and I know that's frustrated Mr. Insua before on specific projects.
Rarely do I.
Rare, yeah. But there were those situations where our conditions got so long, it's almost like, well, are we redesigning this thing from scratch, or what should we do? And so I think there should be maybe a more clear-cut approach to the applicant. We are going to plain old say this thing should not pass, should not be approved, and it has some serious fundamental problems. And I think that kind of goes along with what Mr. Aliana was just saying a minute ago. And so that was one thing that I think is important, that we could easily integrate into the new system.
Thank you. Mr. Ellis.
My experience has been only in the last year, so I'm not familiar with but I found the staff reports to be actually very, they're a lot of information. I do like the fact that you were tying into the design guidelines, and I understand why you're doing that. I would tend to agree with Mr. Simone, and one thought I had was a short chronology of the meetings that you've had with, and I don't think you have to do maybe on every project, but especially the ones that come, and I've kind of found myself reading between the lines to say, well, what is staff really saying here? They're very polite, but they're asking for, approve or return for redesign. So maybe that would be something along with Mr. Simone's suggestion. These are the dates that we met, with a short plug of, applicant, whatever. But I could see that helping to make that decision go a little quicker.
Thank you. Mr. Insua.
Yeah, great points. And you mentioned something right now. I think that the reports are certainly better than they were. Not to say that they were bad in the past. I thought they were very good and very adequate, and for all in general, they provided the information I think I needed for the last 7 years or so. But they're enhanced now. Maybe that's the word. They're enhanced. They provide quicker, faster, more accurate information concerning the project, so that in the short time that we have here to review the project on the written document and then to express our response to it, there's a lot more information there, and it's a greater tool to do our job, if you will, our commission. I will say that I once had a concern about the staff recommending or not recommending a project, the greater one being recommending in this way. I was concerned that if an applicant had been working a lot or not a lot, not important about how many times you may have been meeting with the applicant, but if you had recommended a project, they may have been given the impression, or the impression may have been, or may still be there, that the project is going to be approved. Well, they're working with staff, trained professionals, been doing this for a long time, and if they're recommending it, and I agree that they're usually, if not every time, recommended with certain things to consider, maybe to consider to be approved as part of a condition, that it may give the impression like our job is done. And then when they come to DRB, I would say it's sometimes as much as 20 to 30% of them that may have been recommended didn't get approval. So the impression, unfortunately, may be, oh goodness, the DRB didn't listen to staff, didn't follow the guidelines or the recommendations of staff, and it may give the wrong impression that they thought that they were approved. It was a done deal, as my kids would say, and then in fact it's not, and it has to start the whole process all over again. And truly, as you said originally, Mr. Ellis, when you made your speech, that our goal is really to get you approved. We want projects to be up here and be excited about them, and every once in a while we do get excited. Wow, what a great process. Many projects have been of that type lately. They've been working with very competent staff, and by the time we get them, the end result is many of them are, boy, what a good job the applicant has done. But my initial concern was, if they recommended approval and we denied it, that would be really a big blow. And then the second thing that I was thinking about is, and I think the chronological, what meetings have occurred and when you occurred, I think it's a good thing, because often we feel like we want to help the applicant and bring them back to the planning department. Oh goodness, did you, when here on April 1st, if you will, you met with the staff and they pointed you towards the roofing material or the inappropriate nature of this element. That was a key moment. If you had just listened, and you had 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 months, it would have made this process easier. So I think a chronological review would be a good tool for us to say, and you had these meetings. And then in closing, I would say that most of the time, I think was mentioned over here, most of the time when someone says, no can do, we want it, it's a deal breaker, if you will. Those statements are often based upon square footage desires. We need this square footage, irrespective of context and setting. Bulk, size, mass and scale. We need this square footage, and thus, as a result, it looks this way. I think we have plenty of examples where square footage was properly executed, not at an expense of bulk and scale and impact in the neighborhood. That often, I find, is just an easy statement to say that you really didn't execute the design that well. So issues when that occurs, deal breakers often is mass and scale, bulk, size, footprint on the site, not properly setting the design on the site, and then specific items like driveways, side yard setbacks, heights, and so on are often couched in, that's what we want, they're deal breakers, but in fact are against code, against the common, guidelines of the neighborhood. Look around where your neighborhood context is, and then bounce that against it's a deal breaker, we want it. Because that often is a deal breaker for us, not to approve it.
Thank you. I see you jotted down a couple of things. If you could
Well,
share.
I was just going to say, I'm coming from not having any staff reports and just being given plans and trying to spend the whole time evaluating, and I think the reports are a huge help. And because you're pressured up here with a minimum amount of time, and you might not cover some of the aspects and understand some of the projects. So I think that's a huge help, and I think Mr. Ellis's comment about the chronological order is it just gives everybody a little impression of how that project has gone through and how to sort of handle it when it does come to the board.
Thank you. I think there have been a lot of good suggestions, and so I'll just keep it short. But regarding the staff reports, they definitely have gotten better. I think there's more information in there. There's more for us to look at and sort of follow the history of things a little bit better. The chronological order, that's a great idea. Maybe a stronger presentation of actual meetings that have occurred is also, I think, is a good idea. I guess not really dealing with the staff reports, but I would say that 90% of the applicants and what they bring in and everything, the exhibits are there and what we require. I think there's that group of applicants where maybe not all the materials are there, maybe not quite to the level that we would like to see to be able to get a good sense for the project. And so maybe try to be a little bit more, or try to be a little more stricter in getting them to provide that information before they come might also help us to give more time to the projects that have actually taken the time to do that. So I think that's it for now. I think we'll continue.
If I may, I'd like to. It's so great to have this conversation because you have highlighted many important things that we were really hoping you would bring up. Let me just address a couple of things. First of all, one of the purposes of the staff report is for the community to have an upfront view of what to expect, because while the DRB members can look at a plan and readily kind of see a lot of things, I think one of the reasons why we were asked to start preparing staff reports was that the community wanted to see some level of analysis and some recommendations so they can actually use that to understand the project before they come to the design review board. That's one thing. The second thing is that to follow what Stephanie said earlier, one of the things we have kind of used to gauge the level of recommendation and analysis that staff gives in the staff report is that we try to stay a couple of steps behind you. In other words, we try to not go beyond 70% of where we think you'll go, but we will warn the applicants that what staff is saying and what staff is recommending is probably going to be added on, and that DRB will be stricter than this. Oftentimes, what happens is that by the time an application comes before you, we've been through a journey with some of the applicants, and they have been negotiating and renegotiating. Oftentimes they try to get an exemption, and once they have given up on the idea of getting an exemption, they try to negotiate getting staff to recommend, because they do think that staff's recommendation carries more weight. And in fact, we have said that no, the design review board members individually and the design review board as a whole are very independent, and they will not hesitate to go beyond what staff has said. But oftentimes that's where we're at by the time we come before you. And it has not been uncommon for applicants to ask us not to even make a recommendation, because we tell them we will not recommend approval of this, because we have been through that impasse with them, and we have said, no, if you do not make this change, we will recommend a denial, or we will recommend that this other condition be added, and they try to ask us to remove that. What I'm trying to say with all of this is that it is really refreshing to hear that from the dais, so that we can now have a much more upfront level of communication with some of the applicants and say, this has been officially said at the design review board. We can also include it in our report to the staff, to the city council. Regarding to the chronology that you've asked us to put in, one of the tasks we have to do, we have to walk this fine walk of giving customer service and a level of respect and privacy to the conversation that some of the applicants have had with us. So, to the extent that you ask us to identify some of the issues that they have not agreed with us, I think the best way we can probably start doing that without really damaging the relationship between the applicants and staff, so that they will not think that staff is out to get them, quite frankly, is to really make some general reference to those things, because sometimes they've been really contentious. And for us to actually write a chronology of what we recommended and what they refused to accept would really put them on the spot. And I think they would feel really betrayed by staff if we did that.
And I think, going along your thinking, I think it may also prohibit the creative, constructive dialogue for an improved plan at that early stage. If they're fearful, if they say or do something, may come up to bite them in the rear end later on. Good point. So you want it to be open, free, and be able to move forward constructively.
Yes, and that said, I think there is a lot of value in saying, at least generally, covering some of the topics that were discussed, so that yes, we will expect you to read between the lines, and but that will help us not to put the applicants on the spot as much. What we have found to be most effective is that they have been negotiating with staff back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and they got their application before you, and lo and behold, you are all saying the same things and some more. That really validates the process, that they know that they're there to actually get a prelude on what to expect from the design review board. We try to just really, as Stephanie said, prepare them for what they should expect here. So we found that to be really the most effective way, and then some of the applicants who have been a little bit more resistant at the beginning, and they're the frequent applicants, after a couple of these cases, they have actually been a lot more willing to interact with us and step forward. And so that we will work with that and come up with a way of incorporating something in the staff report that will be giving you a little bit more of a sense, but we will, with all due respect, we'll try to still maintain some level of decorum between ourselves and the applicants. And with regard to attached materials and extensions, I think Stephanie will be talking about some of the complaints we have heard about the cost of producing the materials for the city of Glendale, and how that can become prohibitive, and that'll exclude certain types of architects and just architectural quality. But I think what we can take away from this interaction is that we need to be a lot more upfront to all applicants that, yes, architectural review in Glendale is more costly than you would expect elsewhere, and how we are going to package that and communicate that will be a challenge, but we'll work with that.
Just a quick thing about the timeline. I would think that that's a helpful tool to have as a staff member anyway, because a lot of the things that we hear when people are here, they say, well, this has been a 2-year process, and, we've gone from here to here to here. But a lot of the times, if you don't have that sort of outline, you can kind of see that, wow, maybe I didn't do this as quickly as I should have. So it's not all sort of on the staff side of it, on maybe the delays or those kinds of things. And so I think it's a good way for them to see how the process has gone, as well as for the staff to be able to see maybe where things have gone, and maybe not get to a point where you're pointing out some contention between one or the other, but talk about what issues were discussed at least, materials, roof or something very generic.
One of the things that, I think that your request and recommendation for a chronology of meetings, I think that would be really helpful, because what we find whenever we talk to the applicant, and certainly when they come before you and say, oh, this has been a 2 or 3 year process, for them the process starts when they first start thinking about remodeling their house, not when they first met with us. So if we have that in the report, that will give you some guide as to how much they've been open and trying to, at least trying to work with us. What we have done, and we will keep in mind that you would appreciate more directness in the staff report while still trying to protect the relationship, as Director Hagani has mentioned. One thing that I also want to point out is that the things that we know are of utmost importance to you, the issues of windows, roof materials, and other details that we've heard time and time again, we're very clear with the applicant that this is what we've heard and this will go in as a condition. Other issues that we're less clear about that could go either way, that will be sometimes in the discussion. And what we try to do, so as not to reveal too much about the dialogue or to frankly embarrass our applicants, is to point those out a little bit more gently, especially if we're a little bit of unsure of what you might say, how you might evaluate the project, and really what specific. Very often there's really no specific guidance that we could give, but that analysis is anything that you see in the staff report, you should know that that has been stated to the applicant very clearly, and always know that we're very clear with our applicants that we're not the decision makers, that the board is the decision makers, and that we just do our best. Our crystal ball is usually very cloudy, but we do our best with that. As far as the materials, because the board has such a high level of expectation in regards to details and quality of materials, and because the community, frankly, expects a high quality of materials because their neighborhood is largely composed of quality materials, we are starting to ask, and the board is starting to expect, certain details, cut-through sections of window details, sometimes eave details, lots of brochures and catalogs. And as a practicing architect prior to working for a city, I personally never did a project where I didn't cut a wall section or a window section. I'm finding that that's not true of all of the applicants that we work with. So very often we have to give them guidance on exactly how to do a section through a window, because that's not part of the standard practice. That was a surprise to me, so I thought I would relay that to you. What we may do as we take in all of the information from these study sessions and incorporate that with what we've heard consistently from the board meeting after meeting, we'd like to revise the submittal package. And what we may do is, where we think it's of primary concern, make sure those details are included in your package. On the hillside sites, for example, we've been asking for a lot more detailed information in regards to the site and the topography, site sections, and the board has responded very positively when that information is included. We also have been asking for our architects and applicants, particularly with homes that are styled of a traditional style, we're asking our applicants to do some research and find an architectural precedent to work with, because we notice that when an architect is working with a precedent, then what they will design has a more authentic flavor and quality to it. And the board, when on the few applicants that have brought precedents, we know the board has especially felt that that helps ground the project, and the board has been received those projects very positively. So those are the kinds of things we're starting to ask for, and what we may do is, where we know that the board will need that information in order to make a proper evaluation, we'll go ahead and require it before you see it.
Thank you. Do you have any questions?
I'd like to move the discussion on to the types of decisions that the DRB is empowered to make, and how staff's recommendations interplay with us. We've touched on this a little bit, but again, just to recap legally, let's just to speak of the final reviews, the two final reviews that the board has an opportunity for. In the first review, you cannot deny. You can approve with conditions, or you can return it for redesign. In the second review, you can approve with conditions, or deny. You cannot return for redesign a second time. You can't do that in the second meeting. I guess I would emphasize that the practical implications are two. That a return for redesign is actually a submittal of a new application. It costs the same as the first submittal in terms of the application fees. They might save a little bit on mailing labels, but I think the board, might be wise to keep that in mind if you're ever hesitant to return, if you're ever hesitant to deny something. From the applicant's point of view, from the cost that they have to go through, a denial is pretty similar to a return for redesign. So, a denial has this strong negative charge to the word, but on a practical level, maybe it's not so different.
Mr. Foy?
Go ahead.
If I may just interject for a second, just for clarity purposes. So if a project is here for the first time, and we say return for redesign, they have to resubmit a new application in?
And pay the same fees they paid the first time. Now, the board is empowered to continue projects, but really we have, the code anticipates, and we have always worked with the boards to limit those to just areas where you need a little bit more detail on a specific, very limited range of topics.
And if I may, the City Council was very specific about this particular aspect because the City Council wanted the applicants to really focus a lot of their attention on the prior to the first review. And this was meant to work as a disincentive for the applicants to try to keep coming back to the DRB and see when they can wear out the DRB or staff, et cetera. So that's why the City Council was also very specific about the use of continuance of a case to be very judicial in doing that, and in very specific occasions when there is a real good reason to do that, as opposed to return for redesign.
Okay. Yeah, I guess on a practical level, the way I see this coming into play is often with this board and the other board, I'll see a reluctance to deny because I think there's just a very admirable human impulse to try to help people out, and you don't want to say denied, but I guess I just ask you to consider that it's not so different than a return for redesign.
May I ask a question? So when you, on the second meeting, you say we deny a project, they have to resubmit a new application for the appeal?
Yes, well, that's it. That's the second major implication, is that a denial can be appealed.
Right. So they go directly to City Council.
Right, and as well as an approval, or an approval with condition on either the first or second review could be appealed.
Oh, really?
And it's not even unheard of for an applicant to appeal their own approval.
Well, yeah, if it's approved, usually the other side.
Usually.
But if there is a condition that the applicant does not, they could appeal. I think we may have one of those coming. And just to be clear, there's actually nothing in the code that prohibits an applicant from applying again with the same project or a revised project, because each time you give you don't do it often, thankfully, but when you do deny a project, very often you give very specific direction to an applicant. So there's nothing that prohibits the applicant from making changes and applying again to you, rather than appealing to the council.
I guess what staff is trying to politely say is the same way that you said to us, please do not hesitate to recommend denial. We are also saying that the second time around, please do not hesitate to deny an application when it's when you really think, despite whatever staff has said, even staff has said has recommended approval with conditions. If you think you should deny it, go ahead and deny it, because the applicant can come back and go 2 rounds. And then with regard to the appeals to the City Council, we have had 1 year. But so far, I do not remember a case that has been appealed and the council has been more lenient than the Design Review Board. In fact, if anything, they've taken a couple steps further, and they've been a little bit more restrictive, or sometimes a lot more restrictive than the Design Review Board. And we won't hesitate to say that to the applicants, that they could appeal your decision if you deny. However, in our experience, that does not necessarily guarantee an approval by the council.
For just information purposes, how many do you think have gone to council this last year? About 5?
About half a dozen.
Not very many.
Not that many.
Is that from both boards or one board?
Yeah.
Both
boards.
He was probably all from board number 2, of course.
Yeah,
but
right. Yeah, they don't know what they're doing, right?
I do think with this revised process, I believe council was hoping to see fewer appeals. Although I would venture to say that most of the projects that get appealed are at least of better quality design, and there might be issues over size and siting, but the architecture looks better, by and large.
And
To your credit.
as far as current appeals are concerned, how many projects from our board are currently in the appeal process that are waiting? As in, how many appellants have filed an application?
I'll come back to you with the answer to that question.
Yeah, I don't actually know of any that are currently on the docket. As you may or may not know, there was one from this board that was appealed on Tuesday night, and that decision was overturned. As Hassan had mentioned, there have been a handful of cases. We're not sure which boards they've come to, but Hassan can check.
We had
and
one
let
other
you-
one for sure, and then
We did?
I think the other ones were from board 2. I think it was.
Which one was the one? Well, you probably don't remember. I definitely don't
I
remember.
went to that
address.
one, and I think
Oh, that was about a month ago or so.
Right.
Month and a half ago.
it was regarding.
That was,
Mr. Malikian's.
That was
project,
on
Oh,
Dwight
that
Drive.
hillside project.
the balcony one.
And that decision was upheld, and in that case, a condition that the board applied was actually removed. So that
went
was
the other way.
that was a more an unusual
Yeah,
case.
So it's a restriction that we put on them. They
Yeah,
lifted.
that situation was an addition of a balcony, a very, very tiny addition to the house, and an addition to the balcony. There was another project on Allen Avenue that I'm not sure if you remember. That was a different. That was board number 2. So the others, I think, were board number 2.
That's what I remember.
Okay. So not too many.
No. And, you know, of course, I don't think that one could say that, you know, one board is stricter than another, that the board is always stricter than staff, or that council is always stricter than the boards. I mean, this is an iterative process that we all learn from the decisions that of the level above us. On that topic, I guess I would just note, you've talked about this a lot, and you can add anything else you'd like, but just to talk about the number of staff recommendations for denial and how the board reacts to that. Mr. Insua had it just about right. We did some very kind of crude counting of the number of applications where staff's recommendation was the same as the board's action. And it was about 2/3 of the cases. And of the remaining 1/3, most of them, but not all, the board was more restrictive. Now, we didn't break down, when I say that, you know, we recommended approval and you also approved it, we didn't go further and try to, you know, assess, well, how much stricter were you in your conditions? I mean, so what I'm telling you is a picture painted in very broad strokes, but...
What we're finding, and we're actually very happy to report to the applicants, is that what the advice that we give to the applicants is typically in the same general direction as the board's comments. There have been a small handful of cases where staff has made a recommendation and the board's gone in a completely different direction. That's actually happened a couple of times lately. And what we've noticed about that is that those are cases where the board has essentially questioned the scope of the project. Now, that's actually something interesting. We've started to investigate that. When an applicant comes to us with a project, what we will do is review the project with them on their own terms. If they come to us with a project, say they have a single-family house in a multifamily zone, I'm not sure if this came before your board or board number 2, but let's say this might be a case before you, where there's a house and a garage, and there's some space in the back, and they're allowed another unit. What staff will do is review the design of that other unit. What the board may do is say, well, this would be a much nicer project if you remove the garage or you attach the addition to the house. That was you. So just so that you know, we will typically not try to redo the scope of the project or rework the essential assumption of the designer, but of course the board can do that. So in the cases where you've gone in a very different direction, often we've noticed that it's the review of the scope, which staff is really for good reason, I think, very hesitant to do that.
That makes sense.
I have the answer to your question. There are two upcoming appeals going to the City Council, neither one of which is from this board. They're both from the other board.
But also know that if there is an appeal, that is no reflection on your work, because you all do very good and rigorous work, and we're grateful for that.
That's what Board 2 is saying.
She says that to every board.
Okay. Do we have any questions at this time? I guess we just keep moving, huh?
Yes. The next item that we'd like to talk about is the number of reviews. Originally, when this new process was being considered by the City Council, staff had recommended that had recommended 3 reviews by the Design Review Board before a project could be appealed to the City Council. However, the City Council actually decided to cut that down to 2. Again, with the same intention as I mentioned before, to cut down on the interest on some applicants' parts to try to bring back the same project with a minor tweaking as opposed to the major changes that have been recommended or directed by the Design Review Board. Over the last year, we have come to notice that that intention has worked up to a point. We think that it is working. Some applicants are getting the message that they had better listen to the design. If they didn't listen to staff's recommendation, they had better listen to the Design Review Board's recommendations after the first review. But not always. We have noticed also that sometimes you have noticed some changes in the project, good changes, but not far enough. And that has put the Design Review Boards in a difficult place, that, the project has moved forward, but not forward enough. And we've noticed that it may be beneficial to make a recommendation to the City Council to allow the Design Review Board, a Design Review Board member, to request of the Design Review Board to allow the project to come for a third time, because based on the decision that they have taken in several good steps but not enough steps to be really ready for a final decision, and also that to allow staff to make that recommendation to the Design Review Board to consider that. Of course, it'll be the Design Review Board's decision, and on that third time that either staff can request that you make that decision or a Design Review Board member can make that request, we think that we could recommend that the applicant be allowed to bring it for the third time without paying an additional fee. That way, we don't know. This is an idea that we're throwing around because we've seen a few cases that really warranted either being denied or maybe come for a third time. And the reason was that the board had more to say, and so that's an idea that we would like you to consider, or anything else you would like to say in terms of the number of reviews.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Smoley.
On that note, I think there was a couple of projects that spring to mind where we came up with a lot of conditions because it was a second time around. And we were faced with the dilemma of denying it or approving with a lot of conditions, because we couldn't just approve it as is. And the conditions got really lengthy. And so from what I remember, we turned it over to staff and said, approve with conditions, and then for them to work with staff. And this is, I think, an interesting thing to bring up, just because if we are able to see it a third time, we're hoping that the applicant then really gets the point of how serious it is, and here are the conditions, and hopefully they'll work on it. And they'll come back. On the flip side, it could really go back to the way it was, where they just take a chance. They come a second time, and they haven't done everything. They haven't followed all the recommendations. And then they bring up, or somehow or another, inadvertently say, well, we could bring that. We could certainly work on that, and we'll bring it back. And then we'll kind of stuck with the decision of saying yes or no. So the point I wanted to discuss with the group was, how comfortable are we after how many conditions are placed on there? Should we say, hey, staff, you guys work with the applicant, especially when we know it's a difficult owner or a difficult architect that just absolutely not budging. We could tell. We could see the energy that they are set in their ways and they're not going to change.
Well, if I may, in those cases, staff can also be a little bit more forthright and we've actually started talking about this, where there are conditions that you're thinking of applying where we don't have confidence that we can actually work with the applicant to carry out those conditions, we will be indicating to you, you know what, we're really not comfortable with that.
I would appreciate that. I think that would go a long ways, because there's those times where those conditions pile up.
And it doesn't make our life easier.
That you're going to be placed in,
Right.
because it is going to be so hard to work with that applicant. We could just sense it. And that would be great if you guys would say, you know what, based on previous conversations, we've said these things many of times, it hasn't been occurring, and we're not confident that it could occur again.
If I may, I think the importance what's important is to realize what the tipping point is. Because in the second round, there are times that if the conditions are so complicated, and there are so many of them, that you should really deny. You should not hesitate to deny, and you should not use that as an excuse to have a third visit. Because I think the third visit would only be warranted if the applicant has taken really measured steps to try to meet your conditions after the first review, and they've come very close. But there are times that they should really be denied, and I think that would be now. I think it would also be staff's responsibility to, at some level, say that maybe you could consider denial as opposed to having a third visit. But we will really rely on your judgment, because you, at that point, if this is a comfortable place. And I also forgot to say one other place where we think a third visit might be warranted is after a project has been approved and the applicant has been building it, but not to the conditions that you have given, and we are at a disagreement with the applicants. Oftentimes we get into a situation where the applicant refuses to make those changes and we refuse to sign off, and we are at an impasse. We think we should have the authority to schedule that item for another hearing without additional fees and say, here's where we are at with this applicant. We do not think they're meeting your conditions, and they think they are. What do you think? So that's the third time.
Could you give us an example of what you mean? For example, is there a typical example about a impasse that you may have seen?
For example, a house may have been approved, a very large house, fully brand new house in a very prominent neighborhood of Glendale, with a particular architectural style, and then the applicant, during construction, either the applicant or their contractor, has added some features that to us are really changing the architectural character, and they have spent about allegedly $50,000 on those features. But to us, that's a major change in the architectural style of the building, and we have said, no, we will not sign off on this, and they have put their foot down that, no, you should sign off on this, where I've spent so much money on it. And we cannot force them to pay an application fee and bring it back, but if we have the authority to just schedule it for a public hearing and bring it back to you for you to revisit, this might be a perfectly nice house, but it's not the house you approved. So we think you deserve to see it again, and the community deserves to see it again.
So if I understand you correctly, this example, the non-approved elements that they've done aren't because they're bad or inconsistent with the intent or the general intent of the design, and we can see what that was. It was more based upon an architectural, although different, good, in your opinion. Not that they just want upside down and we voted right side up.
We might think they're inappropriate. But some people like those changes.
If I may, as you know, construction of buildings is not like making the Hubble telescope. It's not quite as precise. There are changes that happen all along the way. And every day we work with applicants and architects moving this window because the beam is here, or can we change this window from this material to this material? Because we are in these meetings with you and we work closely with you, we have a sense on each and every project, and also generally what changes are within the spirit of your approval, and also what is a quality change or what would diminish the quality. So if someone had applied for, say, aluminum clad windows and they want to purchase aluminum windows instead, and so they looked like aluminum before from the outside, they'll still look like aluminum, they'll have a slightly different section. We would likely approve that over the counter without bringing them back to you. If they wanted to change their aluminum windows to vinyl windows, we would likely not approve that. And we would say, if that is a change that you want to make, that is a significant difference. It diminishes the quality, and it's different than what the board approved. They would notice the change. So we would bring that back to you. Anything that is a significant change, that we sort of think of it as that if you're walking your dog past the house and you see the project and you look at it and you say, I don't remember approving that, or that looks really different than I remember. That's sort of a litmus test that we use. If there's a significant visual change or a diminishment of the quality, or if it's different than you intended based on the conditions, we will bring it back to you. There have been a couple of times where either this board or the other board where we thought maybe improvements have been made, but it looked really different. So we had to bring it back to you. Now, in those cases, we would likely bring it back to you on consent. So you would see that we think this is okay, but it had come to a public hearing. We want the community to see what it's going to look like. We want you to approve it.
So there are two potential times where that could occur, working backwards in the time clock. One of them is when you're going out to do field observation of what's under construction, and you see that, and then you go through that negotiation or that discussion process. And then the first time when I can imagine that happens is the project has been approved at the DRB level, usually schematic design level. You go ahead and execute the whole working drawings. You submit it through the process. It has to go through design review or planning department for approval. And you notice that there has been a design change between the schematic design when we looked at it in the design review process and then the full working set. For example, window heights may have been higher. Arches, instead of arches, now we have flat tops. Entrance, porte-cocheres have now become taller. Those kind of elements are the ones that you're probably referring to that haven't been built yet, but you're a little bit the dog litmus test. It's not what we were originally thinking of.
That's right. And then the applicants that are familiar with the process, if their client has asked for a change during construction, they will know to bring it back to us.
And then the second category, you mentioned one category that you understood. Was the second category?
Well, the first one is under construction, and now it's been observed as different. And the original one that I would think of is when, from the time it was approved at a schematic design set to a full completed set for plan checks.
There will also be a third time that we might bring something to you. That is a time that an application has been before us for a DRB review exemption, and the changes that they had proposed were so minimal that we didn't think that they reached the threshold of requiring DRB review. But then in the course of construction, they changed that from what we had exempted. And we think, no, if you had presented that like that, we would have said you have to go to the design review board. And those cases happen too. We would like to have the authority or the opportunity to bring those to you as well.
Now, would that be as a freebie to the applicant? Is that what you're saying on that? No, you're shaking your head. Because that seems to be a real...
Exemption?
No, the third case that you just...
The third case is not a freebie. They pay $120 for an exemption, but they don't come to the design review board.
Right. No, but what I'm saying is, because that seems to me, based on the people who don't follow the rules, it's an out, and they're going to start doing that to try to get around the system.
No, if they don't follow the rules and they have to come back, we put in the same amount of hours,
right.
And those aren't even compensated, the number of hours that we spend in
So that would
each
be
and
a
every
full,
application.
for them, if they get bumped in that, it would be
That's
a full
right.
design review application.
And
Okay.
just one more minor point regarding your record of decision and your decisions. Often you'll find that a project maybe meets with your approval, but you want to comment on a lot of details and materials. I just want to say that and part of the reason that we read back to you, and we'll go over that in a moment, to get your precise ideas and all five of you to agree, which sometimes takes some doing. But if you have precise requests or demands regarding details or materials, that where the configuration is fine, generally the project looks good, but you want all the materials to be kicked up a notch, and maybe that adds a number of conditions. Staff is typically, as long as we have worked with the applicant and we feel that we can, we're typically very comfortable with those kinds of conditions, even if there are a number of conditions that spell out the material detail of the window, recess the window, the roof material should be this, et cetera, and we'll indicate that to you as well.
I was going to wait to try to get information, but maybe this is a quick, appropriate time to try to answer this gentleman's question. We have a project under construction. You go out and you observe that something is not conforming to what was approved at the DRB level. It gets a stop order, if you will. Does it get a partial stop order in this area, or does it get a general stop order? They can't advance the project at all, and so that was part one of my question. So I think, Hassad, you were going to mention something.
No, I will.
Okay, so we have a physical project under construction, and some significant element, or even something of the element, is brought to the attention of the city of Glendale, and you go out and you observe a non-compliant element. It gets a stop order. Is that a general stop order, or can they continue constructing? That's part one of my question. I'll just say my part two of the question. Boy, that is a horrible. If that happens, it has such a potential to impact the neighborhood during that process, because now you've shut a project down. You have blight. You have a project that is then abandoned, and abandonment of a project in mid-construction is horrible on the community. There's a couple that I drive by every once in a while, and to see a project under blight is just a horrible thing. So maybe that's my second question, because the process of a stop order is not going to be something that's going to generally be approved over the next few days. It's going to be a few weeks, if not a couple months. So that's the second part of my question, to provide information. So.
Yeah, I would just say there's a couple of ways to stop work, to stop construction, and one is a stop work order, which, depending on how it's written, could be to stop all work on the site. But there are also times when construction is stopped due to an inability to get a sign-off at a certain crucial point in construction, such as the framing inspection. If work appears to be stopped completely because they can't get a framing sign-off, it doesn't mean that the applicant property owner cannot continue on other aspects such as roofing, landscaping. So there are ways to work it so that maybe some of the conditions of blight that you're talking about can be addressed.
Okay.
That said, we share your worry about a construction site where remains a construction site for an extended period of time and the impact that it has on the neighborhood. And we are looking with the city attorney's office on, and then this might start answering some of the questions that the gentleman from Royal Neighborhood mentioned. One is that we're working with the city attorney to kind of expand the planning department's ability to stop work order for meeting design review conditions, which is slightly different than the authorities we use right now with the help of the building official to stop work order. So we want to have an expanded level of authority to just step in before it's framing inspection time even, because oftentimes our neighborhoods are really vigilant and they let us know that something is really off about this project. So we want to have the authority to step in for that reason alone.
I think that's a terrific idea.
That's one thing we're working on. The other thing we're working on, which is the difference between what the planning staff look for when we do inspections and what building and safety staff look for. And that has been, they're two different things. And we're working with building and safety staff right now to either add inspection by planning staff that will coincide with theirs so that we could do what I just mentioned in terms of our expanded authority, or then to train building inspectors to actually look for some of the design review aspects as well. We haven't worked out the details of that, but they are really only concerned with safety codes, and we are concerned with a lot more, and that's really the difference.
Are you suggesting that maybe the permit card, which is really the driver of the process of
That's
construction, the permit card could have certain triggers along the way before it goes too far? For example, when they frame out a window, if you will, or frame out an opening, or the way they do it. Building and safety is concerned about the structural aspect of that framing. But before they're then allowed to then button it up, as they say, or go after lath and plaster, or get your sign off on electrical or plumbing, DRB needs to come in and sign off the design, or planning needs to sign off the aesthetics of that element. The building and safety really may not even trigger for them.
Yes. Yes.
There actually already is a sign-off on the orange card for DRB framing inspection.
Okay, good.
Single family.
Yeah, and
Single-family
for single
houses.
family, and that also includes the windows. But let me also mention, as Hassan mentioned, we are working together with the inspection staff, and this inspection staff here is more open than in the other cities that I've worked in, and I'm so happy and proud to say that, that they will be able and willing to work with us for certain issues that have started to crop up. Board Member Ellis found one that actually the inspection staff mentioned to us they've never seen actually basements before like this, and so this is now the issue of how tall a basement is something that's now starting to be a red flag that will likely go on a list that we provide to the inspection staff that they'll be happy to look for, because frankly the inspection staff goes to the site very regularly. It's not something that, while we do site visits when we're called to do on the framing inspection for single-family houses, we only see other projects at final inspection as a normal part of our work. Since the inspection staff is there so often, they are very willing to work together with us, so we're very happy to report that.
Not to hog the conversation all, but another part of the question that we often see that the gentleman mentioned was, often during the physical construction of a project, what is very important and critical for planning, for example, how much of the existing house is going to be remodeled, new construction. Because if we all know there's a certain percentage of how and why, that building department might go out there and say, oh yeah, they found that those studs had dry rot, and that obviously is a safety issue or a termite that you couldn't see on the existing house until you took the envelope off. So that the applicant could say, I had to reframe this whole set of walls here because when we opened up the wall, it had dry rot, and we know you as building and safety would not want us to do that. Well, that may be an accurate statement, and I'm sure most of the time it is. But that very act may not be an issue for building and safety because they would applaud that type of care. But for planning, they may be utterly concerned because suddenly you now have gone into an area which has significant impact on what would have been approved, what was approved, and what may not have been approved given the changes of how they did it.
Yeah, I would like to say that this is a matter which has received a lot of attention, I'm happy to say. I think it's another example of what Stephanie was talking about, of the inspection staff and building working more closely with planning than I've experienced in the cities that I've worked in as well. I would say that the decision to demolish a rotted member probably is taken more unilaterally by the contractor without waiting for the building inspector's input. But we did have a system for a while where we were taking those under formal consideration, and it was subject to approval of the zoning administrator, and she would ask for the building inspector's input on it. So they've been thinking about this. It's come to their attention for quite a number of years now. And in addition, the zoning administrator, understanding that this was a controversial topic, asked that this be reviewed by the city council. And the city council has since, set a policy that there can be no demolition due to rotted termites without it counting towards the 50% of demolition that constitutes a new structure. So I guess I want to emphasize that this is a topic which is very much on everyone's mind.
Maybe, forgive me again, one of the things that could be done at the issuance of a building permit, also provide a guidelines of do's and don'ts, for the applicant under construction, because often the general contractor, they have a window to do the framing, if you will. And if they see something when they open something up, they're going to go, hey, homeowner, you don't want to leave this like this, and they lickety-split do something very quickly because it's going to be more cost-effective and time expedient for the homeowner, very admirable, but in fact could be triggering a longer process later on when you want to get it signed up. So maybe a listing of, by the way, you've got your building permit, but if you encounter these things which are different than what's been approved, you must or shall or whatever notify the city, because these are things that have had potential problems and have the possibility of altering what was once approved.
I just want to chime in a little bit about the issue of sort of how planning and building, I guess inspectors are going to be dealing with sort of the individual projects. I don't know if having more inspections by planning and by building is the answer. I mean, the city of Glendale, when you look at a card when it's done with a project, it's got like 40 signatures on it. And it's sometimes gets pretty ridiculous at some of those things. And so maybe I'd be more open to working with maybe the present inspectors that are on the building and safety side of it, and just make them more aware of what things to look for, instead of having sort of a second pair of eyes that go there more often. Because if you have two pair of eyes going at it, no matter how they crisscross each other, they're going to miss things that one person that's really familiar with the project will not be missing if they're there sort of talking with the contractor, and they can kind of give them a heads up of, you need to look out for this, make sure you don't do that, and just build a relationship that way instead of
I have a feeling you may get a little pushback from a building inspector if they have to.
I'm sure you will, but it's sort of the city of Glendale, and so
a building inspector are more engineer contractor types, and often don't want to go into the realm of aesthetics.
That said, we agree with you that would be the most efficient way to go at it, and we will see what we can achieve with.
Because like most things, the rules are sort of written and guided for those 5% that really break the law, and so to penalize everyone else to get 10 other additional signatures on a card, it's going to delay a project, and so I think I'd like to avoid that as much as possible. So
I wanted to jump back real quickly to the suggestion about a third pass. When you mentioned that one board member could request that, would that be a vote of the board then to do? So one could propose it, they'd have to get a second to do?
Well, it could be, yes. We think whether staff requests it and recommends it, or whether a board member requests it, it would be the decision of the entire board.
Would that be the decision of the board or council, since it significantly changes policy?
No, at this point we are discussing ideas that we will recommend to the city council, and if the city council agrees with this particular procedure, then we will officially formalize it.
And actually,
I would say in that same vein, when board members aren't here, I know we've had an issue of being concerned about inviting an applicant to come back again in fear that they're going to face 5 opinions as opposed to 3. And is that detrimental to them? My fear was always they're going to come back and we're going to have a total different discussion than we had that time. And not being, that maybe is the roll of the dice for the applicant. And I don't know maybe how that third step fits into it. I don't know. But
You're referring to if there's a return for redesign that you're recommending, say, with 3 or 4 board members, and there's a potential that they'll come back and hear something completely different from the board member that was absent?
Yes, right.
Well, that's a fair point, and like you said, for the applicants, coming to DRV is always a little bit of a crapshoot. There are always times when board members will see a project and see something that they may not have thought of, and you're never prohibited from saying that. And we all do our best to give as many comments to an applicant. So typically applicants are not surprised by what they hear from you.
Also, that goes back to the whole idea that gives a further incentive to the applicants to try to get approval the first time around.
Right.
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
And going back to the notion of, for whatever reason, whether a project has deviated from the design review board decision during the plan check process, or if it's deviated from the design review board decision during the construction process. I think those, in my opinion, are somewhat different. If they've deviated during the permitting process, then before they're getting their permits approved, they have to go to the case manager that was handling their case through planning, and planning has to sign it, and they have to stamp it. If there's any kind of deviations at that point in time, it's very easy to have a discussion because there's not a huge amount of monetary recourse to it. Once a project goes under construction and things deviate from it, then at that point in time, there is a big monetary component to it, and there is a big policing factor to it. In my opinion, and I'm looking at this holistically, if a project has deviated from design review board decisions during the permitting process, I think it's within our jurisdiction for if there's a huge discrepancy between the applicant and staff for it to come back. And they come back as a whole new case because of the time that's spent on it to discuss, for whatever reason, because of structural reasons or mechanical reasons or engineering reasons or monetary reasons, things have deviated to the point that the applicant feels is absolutely necessary. And then we'll judge the project at that point in time, which is in fact much better for us because we're able to assess working drawings. We're not just looking at a schematic set of drawings. We're looking at the actual working drawings of engineering and so forth included. However, if a project has deviated, and there's been some few cases of this recently, from the approval during the construction process, that I think is a city attorney issue in my mind. Reason being for the following reasons. Number one, we have approved a set of drawings which are really clear to understand. Here's an elevation at a quarter scale. It's colored. It's got the material boards on it. They basically had either, during the framing period, had gotten an approval or had not, but for whatever reason, someone directly made a decision to deviate from the design review board drawings that were approved. Now, that puts us in a very difficult situation to go ahead and assess that, because we had a case that was very similar to that, and it was that old brick building. It was a house, and the owner had done a facade renovation to it, and it ended up coming back here 5 times, and it was very difficult for us to make that decision to make them remove the facade. In fact, there were some members of the board that abstained, that said, as a licensed architect, I can't get involved with this because it's a safety issue, and there were others that for whatever reason weren't comfortable policing it. So can we elaborate on that differentiation between the two?
Yes, we could. And I think you bring a very good point. The issue, we agree that that's a legal issue. However, as a legal problem for the city attorney's office, that could actually be another one of those ongoing problem cases that can go up to 7, 8, 9 years. And the courts may not necessarily act as quickly as we would like them to, because our first intention is to maintain a certain level of sanity within our neighborhoods. So we think that it's better to come up with an administrative process that we could do at the staff level to move faster with some of these projects that are stalled. That said, another option for those cases that are mid-construction, perhaps, Tim just gave me the note, this is something we discussed with staff, that we could also recommend that on an annual basis, when you select your chair, you could also select a subcommittee of every design review board will select a subcommittee of 2 members, that for that year, every time we get to one of these cases and we get to these disagreements with the applicant, we could just call those 2 subcommittee members and discuss that with those and see if those changes are acceptable or not. And then that way we don't have to bring it back to the entire design review board, but at least you know who the 2 are that we call for that 1 year, and that would be another way to deal with it. But the main purpose is not to take it to the courts. It becomes very costly, and it also can take years.
And
often the neighborhood suffers during that process.
That's right. A couple of things. We don't often find too many disagreements with applicants on their way to a building permit, because they typically want to get their building permit. What we do find, and we want to be frank with you about this, is that there are applicants that will do what they know they need to do to get all their approvals, and then they will order what they want and build what they want, thinking that asking forgiveness is easier than asking for permission.
Exactly a note that I wrote here.
So that is a very, very tough thing for everyone, because we all understand the monetary pressure. And that's why we're very firm about not signing off on something, because there's so much transparency that the community has trusted us all with these projects that have come to a public hearing. You all give your volunteer time, and we respect your decisions a great deal. It's very important to us not to sign off something, because in all honesty, those are very challenging discussions that we have, and they can sometimes be prolonged and many meetings, and we are very, very conscious about holding the line. So what we also want to say is that we've sometimes brought those cases to the boards. Obviously, the board members change and so forth, but we've seen the board struggle with this because of the monetary responsibility. But do know that we, as a process and as a city, need to be careful not to appear to make it easier with our decisions for people to ask for forgiveness because of that awareness.
So a question on that topic. I would assume that the city attorney currently has jurisdiction to come in to a project during the construction before the final certificate of occupancy is placed and say, this doesn't meet the design review board drawings that were approved.
That is,
and if so, if we're changing it and it's coming back to us, then we need to put more teeth on what the city attorney could dictate, whether it's a bond or whether they literally come in and fix the changes and put a lien on the property. I mean, let's say we as a body say, yes, it is absolutely wrong, we need to change this whole thing, and it's going to cost $150,000, and the owner says, I'm not doing it. So now we're still at that standstill, but what do we do now?
That is exactly the point. And then, yes, so there are actually some cases where working with the city attorney to do exactly some versions of that. And I can't say more because we're in court with these people. But the bottom line is that in the end, we don't really know when these projects will actually move forward, and when there will be some level of correction that will be acceptable to the city and the community and to the applicant, frankly, in some cases. So in the meantime, we're looking for ways that we could still intervene through our administrative process, like I said, to move things faster, maybe a little bit more amicably.
So I'm assuming that in cases like that, or in examples that you give, where it's sort of a gray area is where we're going to be touching on those things. Because if it's a matter of, we approved aluminum clad windows and they come with vinyl, I mean, that's something that you have the authority to say no. But it's sort of the gray areas that you're looking to us to be able to sort of maybe re-emphasize or
sometimes there are very clear areas that the applicant will dig in and will say, no, we can't sign off on this. So the remedy is to really take it to the design review board, and once the design review board makes their decision, then if there's no movement on the project, we can get the city attorney involved. But we have to do it in that order.
You already have our decision on that, though.
Right. That's exactly the case. And but what goes on between staff and the applicant sometimes is not apparent to you, and they will go on and on and on and on, and disagree with staff, and they will write letters. They will want to have meeting after meeting after meeting, and sometimes we can resolve all of that by just bringing that back to you.
And I think holding on to the spirit of what we always want to do in this process is to get people approved as quickly as possible. So perhaps what you're suggesting is that once there is an impasse, eliminate the potential delays. Thinking about them, just go straight to DRB, give us the opportunity, or the two-team person that you're suggesting, to see if that helps move it along quicker.
And as Hassan mentioned, that would require a change in the code so that staff would have the authority, because right now we don't have the authority to bring something before you. It really has to be staff just saying, no, you will not get a permit or you will not get a sign-off on this, and you must take it to DRB. Currently, we don't have the authority to bring them in front of you. So that's where we're sort of asking for your opinion. We're seeing nods, so we'll take that as a recommendation to the council.
Has staff considered, instead of coming back to us, to go straight to city council? Because someone could, on a case like that, we're going to get appealed. So the applicant, instead of spending $150,000, $200,000, whatever the case is, if there's been so much animosity between applicant and staff's in that position, and now it's coming back to us, why not go straight to city council, where the city attorney's there? And
I think that makes more sense too, because
I would-
we've already have our decision on.
No, I would imagine that if I would imagine that at least that one little quick step would be that opportunity that if it did get appealed, at least council and review would say, well, we even gave you this one quick little step, instead of trying to then become designers and interpreting what's good or bad, if it met the threshold or not.
And I think council has made it very clear to staff that they would like us to come up with a process that will reduce the number of appeals, not increase them. So.
Right. I knew that was going to happen.
If I may add just a couple of thoughts on the idea of more enforcement and taking things to city attorneys. Sometimes it's to our advantage to to work out solutions within City Hall. When cases go into the court system and they're in the hands of a judge or a jury, they may not share the sense of righteousness that we're all expressing here, and they may view things differently. So it might actually work, your decisions might be upheld more faithfully if we didn't always throw the full weight of prosecution to people without, discriminating between the cases. I will say that I do believe there are people who get something approved with intention, a forethought of not building it. And it's probably worth noting that on Tuesday of this week, City Council adopted a new fee resolution that doubles DRB application fees for when it's a case of Neighborhood Services Division having issued a letter of citation. So that is a very serious issue, which we're all paying attention to. But I do think there's also cases where people honestly are ignorant of the costs of what they're proposing, whether the professional they've hired has not fully warned them or whether they just don't grasp it. And also with remodels, the house I own is from 1927. I know from experience that there's a huge contingency cost I have to build into any project which involves opening a wall. I mean, I'm just holding my breath when these projects start until I know what's really there. It's just hard to know, and it's not always a case of bad intent on property owners' parts.
Okay. Can I
Go ahead,
I've been holding my thoughts for a little bit. A lot of great comments, but here's what I think about this issue with the third approval. I think there was a key word that you mentioned, Sani mentioned, administrative. To me, I feel like the city, the planning department has always had the right to exercise administrative powers to do what they need to do to make a project right. So in my view, if currently we have 2 reviews, the project doesn't get approved, gets approved and moves to the second stage, or the second approval gets approval conditions, it gets built. There are requirements, perhaps, and maybe there aren't, but if there are requirements attached to the approval, then they follow those requirements. And we've basically done what we're supposed to do. Once the project is built, or it's in construction, and it doesn't follow those guidelines that we set forth for them, for the approval, that's where I think planning department comes in and says, we can exercise our administrative powers to basically do whatever we need to do to make things right. And from that perspective, I think a third or a fourth, whatever review is warranted. And I don't think it really needs to be part of the design review approval process. It's just a separate thing that the staff needs to have, a part of their...
I'm fearful, and I don't want to interrupt, but I'm fearful that I'll tell you why. We're all humans. And if I saw the same person and been working with them for a long time, even though I think what they're doing is completely wrong, I'm going to be more accommodating to them and try to work with them and ultimately get worn down and say, go ahead. One of the things I like about design review is that we don't have a lot of time, and we also don't get to know the applicants like you do. And I can be a lot more impartial when I've only seen it for a week. I got the package on a week before, Thursday. If it's something really critical and tough, I go by the project. If it's a little thing here, I often don't go. But the tough ones, I go. And when I make my recommendations, I don't know the person as a human. It's a heck of a lot easier for me to be impartial and speak only about the architecture and not get weighed down, because I know that if I was on the planning side and I saw the person over again for 3 or 4 months, I couldn't do it. I would ultimately go ahead, approve it. Matter of fact, I'd probably design it for them. I'd go out and hammer the nails for them because I want them to be approved. I like where we are in that process.
I think we're talking about two different things.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think you misunderstood what I'm saying.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that I'm not asking the staff to approve. What I'm saying is that if the project is out there, is being built, and it's not being built correctly, there's deviations from the design, we will never know unless we walk the dog and look at it and see it. We will never know. So we will not have a chance to really bring it back. Staff are the only people that would do that. That's why I think you probably misunderstood what I was saying.
I did.
What I'm saying is that the staff, if they notice something wrong, they should always have the right to bring it back. I'm not saying that they have the right to approve it.
Got it.
I'm saying they're the ones that are basically policing it in a sense.
Yes.
As you said that. Because once they see something wrong, they can say, you know what, this is something the board should look again. One more time to see if something could be something could be done, as Mr. Foy said. You know, it's very difficult when a project is out there and then goes into the legal system to make it expedient. And I think that's what this is all about. So I'm saying, I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying I think there should be a mechanism for the project to come back to us without being an additional review, just something that you do. The reviews are still 2. You still go through the same process. But if something goes wrong out there, staff should always have the right to bring it back to us.
I think, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're making a distinction between a third review after the second review,
Correct.
as opposed to a third review after a project construction has started. If I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that you would like to limit it to 2 reviews before the final denial or approval anyways, but you would still like to give us the opportunity to bring an application back if during construction we think they're deviating.
And it doesn't have to be during construction either. It has to be, it's out there. It's already been approved. It hasn't even started construction, but there's a problem. The owner says, you know what, I really want to add a few more things here. Can I do that? And you start saying, no, this is really changing things quite a bit. You, as the planning department, should have the right to say, I don't think this is what the board approved. It needs to go back. And then you figure out a mechanism to bring it back. And that's, I think, what you're trying to ask the city council to do. But here's the risk that I see in that, is that it puts, once there's a third review, let's call it a third review for lack of a better way of explaining it. Let's say this example that the gentleman brought up, where there's a project out there that has thread tagged, and the reason is that it doesn't meet code now, because it's beyond the 50%. Secondly, if it were built new, it would never be built the same way because there are setback requirements that would be different. If that project were to come back to us and you police and you say, you know, we just noticed this project, it doesn't meet the requirements, they demolish more than 50%, all these things, and we need to bring it back, and it comes back to us. Now we're in a position where we're actually in a very compromising position. What we're saying is we're going to have to work with what we got. We're basically going to deal with design issues because nobody's going to ask this group of people to demolish the project and cut down 5 feet off the project. So now we're faced with a project that's completely different, doesn't meet code, so we're having to approve a project that doesn't really meet code. And we're in that position, whereas if it doesn't come back for a review, and you as staff say, you know what, those were the rules. You weren't supposed to have more than 50%. And it puts you in a bad position, because now you have to bring in the legal system, and you don't want to do that. So I'm not saying that I have a solution. I'm just bringing up a potential conflict that could come up.
You're right. You're right. That's a potential conflict. And even if if I don't really know the particulars of this case right now, but I'm not talking about that case, but if, say, we have to take something before the zoning administrator to get a variance, even if the zoning administrator issues the variance, that actually puts staff and you in even a more cornered situation where, okay, they've even gone through that whole process. That is something that we do not have an answer for right now, but that's a good problem to think about.
But I like to emphasize that. I think the idea of having a mechanism set for the city to be able to bring anything they feel needs to come back, I think that's a good idea. But I would say with the 2 formal reviews, I think those work really well. Because I think once you make it 3 formal reviews, you can see what happens. It makes the applicant gives them more leniency. In other words, they know they're going to have another chance. And I think the idea is to try to get this resolved as soon as possible. So I'm happy with the 2 reviews. But
Mr. Simone.
Well, are you finished?
Yeah. Thank you.
Because I know you've been waiting for a while.
No, I basically said the same things you guys have said, just in a different way.
Well, I think this is very beneficial because what it's doing is we're having a dialogue, and it's creating a basis for staff in the planning department to put something holistic together and to get some advice from City Council as to what we should do in these cases. There was that one case that I brought up earlier with the brick remodel. I forget what street it was on. It came back 5 times. They had illegally changed the whole facade.
It's still there.
It's still there, and it was a very difficult case for me to go through all 5 times, and reason being because I wasn't sure what to suggest, short of getting rid of the whole thing. And so I think it would be very beneficial when you do have this discussion with City Council to get direct feedback as to what do they want us to do. Because if we're given this fixed situation of here are the columns, here are the windows, here's the roof, here's where the garage is, here's where the access is, now fix it. It's very difficult to come up with design solutions to try to fix that up here without doing some major changes. And if we are going to do major changes, then at what point is it just basically us telling him how to design a building as opposed to us saying, well, you go back and you come up with an option of cutting the 5 feet off from the property line that you should have stayed away from and tell us what you want us to do. Perhaps that's an option. But the most difficult thing is when we're up here and here's a project that's built and we have to try to design around it, because a lot of times you really have to break it and demolish it to fix it. And it's very difficult for us to do that in a hearing.
Well, since that particular project, and this is not a reference to that particular project, but since then, the City Council has actually made it very clear that they want staff to take a very clear approach not to allow any applicant that is, quote unquote, trying to game the system. In other words, now staff has been given the direction that if the recommendation to the Design Review Board should be that you need to require this building to be demolished and the setbacks met and all of the design guidelines met, at least we know that our marching orders are that is the recommendation we should give you. And that should hopefully open the opportunity for you to have a more free discussion on such cases where somebody is coming to ask for forgiveness, where forgiveness is not warranted.
And I just want to make a clarification, just I guess for the things that we're discussing. The third time idea that we were discussing was regarding in the realm of DRB, and the idea of having an option for people to come back once they have sort of gone off on the wrong end of the street or something. That's sort of a separate issue that we were discussing, because it seemed like we were kind of mixing those two things. So I guess the things we need to discuss are how do we feel about the third return coming back for a redesign, and you sort of at our discretion, and how do we feel about that? And then separating that out from creating a mechanism for somebody to be able to come back when something is not agreed upon between the applicant and the staff, right? So
I may add, just a fine tuning. We are not recommending that the applicant be given the discretion to request to come back. We're saying that the discretion should stay with the design review board and/or staff's recommendation. And I agree that it's good to separate the two. The third review during the application review process and/or later.
So maybe we can talk about that a little bit. The first issue of this idea of having an option that we can exercise at our discretion to bring back a third time. Maybe they're minor things or things that, and I think that's a lot of that is not based on sort of how many items we end up with as a condition, but it's more of how much they have made or how much they've progressed maybe in the first two applications that they've made, and then we can sort of kind of say, okay, just bring back and fix these little things and then have that. How do you feel about that third option? Is that something that you would agree with or not agree with?
Oh, I think that's a good option because you may have made a suggestion for a change and say it's changing a roof line or something, and the applicant comes back and just change the roof line, but it creates other problems and questions, and it's not enough to turn it down. But it would be at our discretion.
They've made their strides to change them.
So in other words, with that example, we actually have two options. We could return it for re-review, whatever, or final, or we can continue it, because if it's relatively minor, no, we could not. At the second time, we couldn't.
We're encouraging you to only use the continuance if you have a lack of information.
And I think that's a little bit of what you
No,
were
that's not
saying.
what I'm saying. I'm saying it may trigger other things that the applicant hasn't thought of, and if he just goes back one more time and adjusts things and moves it around and comes back, and we can approve it. But it's not from a lack of information, it's just created a new set of requirements.
I was going to comment that maybe that's where the consent calendar can fit in, that the audience seems to agree, too.
Especially this side.
Participation in
I mean, to be honest, we were always a little nervous. I think, at least over my year, I certainly would feel more comfortable with them. Coming to the consent calendar implies that staff is totally written off on it. We don't really need to spend this meeting time because there are other projects that need our help more than that one. But that might be there were a couple here I think we had where we really kind of had conditions that we were concerned that would they actually become in the final plans? Would they be able to engineer it like the board wanted? But,
I think we know.
I
understand.
okay.
Yeah, I think you already spoke about it, but if you want to...
Well, I was talking about the staff, process. I suppose if it's left to our discretion, just like it would be left to your discretion after something's approved, I suppose that's not an unreasonable thing. I guess what would happen what would be the benefit? The benefit would be that if you feel like you can approve the project, but there's a few other things that need to be tweaked, and you really don't want to deny the project, and you don't want to send it for approval with comments because maybe the comments might be too many, that would be a good way to do it. Oftentimes, I think it's enough to say approve with comments, but there have been cases where you may want to see it a third time for whatever reason. I suppose it's okay. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it.
I don't think you do it with a lot of cases, but there's that one person that could get through if they just had a little opportunity and they're going in the project.
Yeah, and I understand your argument. I think the argument is good. I'm just thinking in terms of what kind of a message it sends to the public, where the public knows, the board will probably give another chance.
But if they're not making that effort, then we wouldn't have any reason to do so.
Right.
Mr. Swin.
I guess fundamentally, if I had to go one way or another, I think it is a good idea. I think that if it's a rare situation where we have a case that ends up with a lot of conditions per se, and an applicant that is absolutely moving forward every step of the way wholeheartedly and has portrayed a cooperative effort and has, for whatever reason, come up short. They've come up short, but the effort was there. Now, one of us needs to sense that that's a feeling, that's an emotion. We need to sense that and then come up and say, okay, I'm sensing that this is the case, and let's help this person out. In that case, I'm absolutely for it. I'm absolutely for that case. And but I'm cautioned of what Mr. Aliano is pointing out and others have pointed out is if people kind of know they have that get out of jail free card, and they could say, well, okay, I see that where this is going, and okay, we'll come back a third time, and we'll do it this third time. So it's almost like they're playing the craps table, and if they see they're against the wall, they could then suggest it somehow. So again, we'll let staff kind of figure out what's the best approach of how you think we could make the system better. But that's my thoughts.
Maybe that if the thought needs to be generated only by the board, if it's coming from the applicant or the staff, it would be immediately probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
Especially if it's coming from the applicant. Sure.
The thing is, there's already a process, right, that the city council has approved, which is that the city council is comfortable with the idea of bringing up continuing a project if there's insufficient information. So now what we're doing, actually, we're saying kind of the same thing, except is let's bring it back not because there's not sufficient information, but because we feel like this project needs another review. I'm not sure how they feel about that. I mean,
Well, let me just say where this, in one or two cases, recent cases, that we have observed that the board, one of the boards made staff recommended approval with X number of conditions, and the board maybe took those conditions and added some to them, and then stepped forward to approve with those conditions, and staff thought, oh yeah, we can handle these conditions, and the board thought, yeah, staff could handle these conditions, and one, maybe more board members had that instinctive moment where they thought, no, this is a little bit too much. And we learned afterwards that that particular board member was perhaps correct. And what seemed like a doable task, if that board member had the opportunity to say, well, I think so, but maybe I'm not comfortable with so many conditions, or maybe this really warrants another visit, perhaps that would be fine. But as long as the boards are comfortable denying something where you're at that impasse, we don't necessarily think there's a need for a third visit. But there are places that we've seen both boards actually stand on that fence, and then they, what is the tipping point that gets you to approve with so many conditions as opposed to deny? If you think that tipping point is really hard to gauge, maybe you want to have the third review. If not, then we're fine with 2 reviews.
And that third review is intended to be not an additional fee, right? Right. And, okay.
And we could also, if it sounds like some of you have reservations about this insofar as it may be, as you mentioned, a get-out-of-jail-free card, what we can also try to do is be very clear with you about how we feel about, well, we're really, we could probably do this, but we are less comfortable doing this than in other cases where you have approved with conditions. So we will do our best at the meeting to evaluate that as much as we can in each case and give you an indication of how comfortable we are.
Okay. And I was the person that said the get out of jail card. But after hearing what Mr. Hagana so eloquently put, I think that's exactly what I had in mind. I mean, that's perfect. That is exactly the situation that has come up, and I think that third visit would be ideal. It's perfect for everyone. It's a win-win situation. And so those situations, as you described, are, I think, exactly the right spot for a third time for a project to come back. So, and that's what we need to be mindful of. That's what we're talking about.
Right.
There's so many conditions that we're just not even sure how it's going to look, and we're saying, okay, perhaps it's the roof line that's been changed that needs some more manipulation, and if that's the case, I think that's a great idea.
And I think it's important to sort of see it, to continue sort of that analogy. There's that, it's a card that we hold and we can apply when we see fit. It's not something that they'll just bring up as a third card, and so, it's at our discretion. And so I think to have options to be able to sort of get projects approved with, I guess, the minimal delay is a good thing. So I think I'm open to the idea of having that option. So, I mean, we'll take it to the council and see what they say, but, they could write out, say, that's taking it a third meeting and we don't want it, and so, but I think we've discussed it, and, could go both ways on that, so. Thank you.
All right, good evening. The record of decision. The Design Review Board record of decisions are really legal documents like resolutions generated by other city boards and commissions. And these are documents that staff uses and the applicants use to work together to make sure that your wishes are carried out. When a project is returned for redesign, the record of decision guides changes to the plan so that when the plans return to you, they better reflect your ideas expressed during the meeting at which you discussed the project. When the project is approved, the record of decision directs changes in the plans needed to approve a building permit for the project. Staff, as you probably have noticed, is spending a considerable amount more time crafting the conditions during the meeting that are contained in the record of decisions than we have in the past. And you may have noticed that we're requesting clarification from the board and asking you to focus more on the conditions so that they reflect your precise language and your wishes. Project planners are also reading back conditions as we hear them. Part of the reason why we put this on your agenda is to sort of emphasize the importance of these record of decisions and the conditions that are within them. And we're also asking, are there things that we can do that would improve our crafting of decisions or the language that we use? Do you have any suggestions of us? Any discussion on those, on the conditions contained in the record of decisions?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think if from the cases that we've had, when you read back to us the conditions and all the things that you are planning on documenting and making a part of the project's record, I'm not sure that you can do much more than you've already done. I don't really have anything else to add.
One thing we'd like you to maybe consider, because very often there's a lot of dialogue, which we always appreciate. We take notes as best we can and read back as much as we can of what we've heard. On the more complicated projects, there may be a possibility, and this could be at staff's request or at the board's discretion, to have a small 5 or 10 minute recess, so we would have the opportunity to craft the language, put it before you, and you can look at it. If you think that that's best for every project, so that we could do that regularly and you would know exactly what language you're voting on, or just for the complicated projects or more complex projects where there's been maybe not consensus on every single point. Because what we found is when we do the read back, sometimes that sponsors a whole nother discussion, and then we start to go back around again, and where very often the planners are now watching the last half hour of the tape over and over again to make sure that we get it right. And that, we're very grateful that you take the time in each meeting to look at the minutes. As you've probably noticed, the minutes come to you later later because we take a lot of time. We do look at the tape now. We look at all of our notes and make sure that because we take this document seriously and it's a very strong basis, is so important for us as we work with the applicant. That's why they come to you a little bit later. So we do appreciate that when you do have comments, we have now a rigorous process in place for making sure those additional comments will get into that record and be revised and sent to the applicant. So those are just some ideas for how we can improve even more.
Well, I see your point. I'm trying to think to my mind. Once there's a motion, and the motion is either passes or doesn't pass, or there's a record of whatever happens with that motion, there's comments sometimes. And yes, oftentimes you're reading them back to us before there's an approval, there's a vote taken, for the reason that you don't want to record something that hasn't been approved. So what you're saying is that if we had a way to make comments, have a motion, have the comments reviewed, and then we approve whatever that motion says, it passes, you're saying that in a more complex project, you want to have an opportunity to sort of recreate
the language,
and then bring it back to us. But doesn't that create problems with the motion process? Because once a motion is
That would be before the motion. We would recommend a recess. We would craft the language, put it before you. You would read it, make whatever changes, and then make the motion.
So we take a break, basically.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But you're saying do that only on really complex projects.
That's what we're suggesting, so as not to prolong the meeting. Because usually, I think it's very often you have similar comments. We're able to read it back and button it up as we're having the discussion. It's only when it's a more complex project and we've heard some disagreement where we might say, it might be a good idea to have a recess.
I think we can leave that open to,
that's a good idea.
suggested by staff or by us. I think that's a good way of doing it, to make sure we get it right.
Okay. Well,
And we do, though, need to just generally try as best as we can, and this applies to staff as well as the board, is just to be as precise in our language as we can be. I'll give examples of some of the arguments we've had recently with applicants after an approval. Is a board imposed a condition about windows that were exposed to a street. Well, what does exposed mean? And this guy was a lawyer, and he was, demanding that we show where that word had been used before and this kind of stuff. So we might ask you, just let's point out the windows exactly. Sometimes boards, more in the past than now, would say, well, use a high-quality material.
what does it mean, right?
Yeah, and maybe you don't know exactly the material, but then we might ask you to, what characteristics are you looking for exactly? So we're just going to have to tease some things out a little bit more.
Doesn't that go back to the applicant, though, providing the material board that demonstrates to us that they either have high-quality materials or they don't?
Well, if the board is imposing that as a condition, though.
Impose that as a condition.
we
The
would
condition
just like
can't
to-
be, don't bring back those same materials. You want us to head the board to say, this is
But
what we want.
but when you're approving.
Right.
Yeah, but because if you say not the same materials, and that's exactly where we get in trouble with the applicants. They will come up with sometimes unremarkable materials that are different than those, and then they say, well, this meets the condition, and we say, no, it doesn't meet the condition, and that's...
And sometimes, just so that you know, we're not doing that questioning to prolong the meeting. That's not in anyone's interest. But also, sometimes we'll ask you, is this, you did state you wanted to see metal windows here. Well, would fiberglass be okay? Because we do have a sense of what the applicant is going to come back and ask. So if we have in advance, can be a little proactive about what will be acceptable to the board on this issue that you've stated is important to you, then we know what the limits are, and the applicant knows what the limitations are.
Going back to the timeline, that actually will help you a little bit if you have this timeline saying, the windows were the issue here, and if you see it repeated 3 or 4 times, the board is going to kind of get the idea that the windows are an important issue. Yeah.
So we're for that, I guess. I guess we have consensus on that.
Did anyone else want to comment on that? Sure. Then before we move to the next item, there's been a request to maybe have an opportunity for the audience to come up and be able to speak on any other items that we maybe have spoken upon or will be addressing soon. Is there anyone that, I have 3 cards in front of me, but is there anyone that wanted to speak at this point, or did you want to? Okay, so then maybe we'll have you come up first. Yes, please, and then state your name and address for the record. And
I'm Peter Fuad, president of Northwest Glendale Homeowners, 1635 Art Even. This has been a tremendous session. I had a long list. I've been able to strike some stuff off since you've so admirably covered it. Let me just highlight a few points that you've both spoken of and that you may yet speak about. And Mr. Foy was touching on it just a moment ago. In your conditions, you do need to be clear, and it's not just in terms of materials, but should, must, a suggestion, those sort of words. If it's a condition, say they shall, they must, because in a recent project I've had input on or related to, it wasn't always clear. Were they suggestions? I mean, were they maybes? And I know it also came back from some discussions with staff prior to the DRB hearing it. The staff member said, this would be much better. But it was never clear, did they demand it, or was that just a suggestion? So I think that would be one thing to clarify, shalls, if you will. Another item is, and this was touched on, and I think you're going to touch on it more later, is this notion of coordinating building and safety and the planning department. Now, we've had the impression that it is up to the neighbors to police the project. Now, Mr. Hagani said the building and safety are out there, quote, often. I'll assume that's true, but it would be nice if there could be some reliance on the city that they are at least doing what they can. I mean, the neighbors won't be hesitant to speak up, I'm sure, but that the planning and safety, whether it's 2 eyes or 4 eyes or 2 eyes, that there is some regular thing on that. Which sort of, digress a minute, it's been very frustrating as a homeowners association to know who to call. We call building and safety, you have to call between 7 to 8 a.m. on odd Thursdays or something, and it's rare that we get a call back, or it's a delayed callback. It would be nice if there were a helpline that we could call with some confidence that somebody will get back to us on a timely basis who knows about the project. Which sort of goes to the next point on that is, and I knew we do have case planners and we do have files, but it's also been our experience they're somewhat disjointed. The file does not seem to contain everything that one would need to know. So I would urge, I think the case planner needs to be given, needs to be the czar of that project. There needs to be a file with all information in it, and that file needs to be available to the public. I'm assuming these are public records. If there are discussions, either in the before it goes to DRB or post DRB approval, but there's now issues. The project's been red tagged. Why? It would be nice if those records were made available to interested homeowner groups. I mean, because I think a couple of projects that have been mentioned here, tangentially or indirectly, there are stop orders, but try finding out what the stop orders are for. The member of the public, we can't. So I think disclosure, more the transparency thing, would help. There's been I'll wrap up here.
Thank you.
On the legal side, it's sort of been portrayed as all or nothing. You're either in the administrative process and then you flip a switch, you're in the legal side. I mean, can't there be aren't they components of one or the other? Can't the city attorney write a letter? Can't there be something, there can be an overlap where it'll give a little oomph to the applicant that please pay attention to us. And there's been this back and forth on the third hearing versus the denial. To me, it's not crystal. Is it clear in your minds when should you deny a project? When should you have the third hearing? Is it at your discretion? And earlier on, it was suggested that even the second hearing requires more fees to be paid.
Yes.
So, but then just a moment ago, you said, well, the third hearing wouldn't require more fees. Sorry, would the third hearing require more fees like the second hearing?
No. As proposed, it would be at the discretion of the board, that the board would decide to have a third visit on a project, then we would not charge.
Okay. And I think that's I think that's it. As I say, there's a lot of cross marks on my finger. This is a very positive discussion, and I appreciate it. And I think that hopefully it's been good for you. It's been good for the homeowners group. There's been a lot of great words spoken here. Let's hope that it'll come to pass.
Thank you. Myrna Stanley, if you could come up. Just state your name and address for the record, please.
Myrna Stanley, president of the Vertigo Woodlands Homeowners Association. I live on El Rito in Glendale. And I want to thank you. We so appreciate this dialogue. I wish it could happen twice a year just for the heck of it. I'm going to give you my comments, and I know I'm going to jump around, so please forgive me. First of all, I want to thank staff for all the changes on their staff reports. It really helps the residents and the community understand, and when they give a recommendation, you have a justification for it. So it's very clear to us why they're taking a position. It doesn't mean we agree with it or that you agree with it, but we understand where they're coming from. I attended this discussion with the other board, and I had to leave because the sun was going down, and geez Louise, and it's doing the same thing again. But I want to tell you, there was a commissioner on that board that made the suggestion, I think Stephanie alluded to it, that it would really save a lot of time in questions if we got sections of windows. It just just something as basic as that. Secondly, do you think that we could have the applicant show the adjacent structures, especially on hillside projects where there's concerns of loss of view or privacy or mass or something? If they could show the adjacent structure and outline it so you could take a look at it in case you can't make a site visit. And they could even do, dashed lines if they could for a line of sight. Because a lot of people say they're looking right into our master bedroom, or they're looking into. If you just do a dotted line from one structure to the other, that I would think that it would be very helpful. As far as your meetings, whether to have 2 or 3, I totally agree with you on the consent calendar. I've listened to this board just really struggle, because you really want to help the applicant, and that's what everybody's here to do, to get a positive project. But you put on so many conditions, and I don't think that staff would prefer that you do that, but you put on so many conditions. I'm sitting at home and saying, if I were putting all those conditions on, I'd want to take a look at it. I just want to see it and make sure that it's okay. So if you'd require them just to make those changes and put it on the consent calendar, and the 2 administrative board members could take a look at it, if it's okay with them, give it to the whole board on the consent, and you'd probably kiss them goodbye and tell them good luck. Otherwise, and if they have a problem with it, then those 2 administrative board members could tell them, this isn't quite right, you better fix it, or you're going to go back, start all over again. Welcome. And I just want to ask you if on the plans, if you could make sure when people on the landscape plans, when they're putting trees on, if they give us the size at maturity and whether they're deciduous or evergreen, that would be very helpful. What else? I wish I could read my writing. I want to thank you all for this. It's been very, very helpful. I'm sorry it's gone so late for you, but I almost wish we could have both boards at one time, so y'all could talk to each other and meet each other.
It's a good idea.
Thank you again.
Thank you. So I'll hold the last card till the end then, or okay. Thank you. Let's continue on.
But the whole thing just had a half.
I'll take a 5-minute break.
Do we want a 5 minutes?
The next item
There's
is...
been a request for a 5-minute break. I'm sorry.
Oh, there you go.
How many items are left, by the way? I'm just wondering, because I know we jumped around.
Power through it.
On your agenda, numbers 7 and 8, even though 8 actually we would like to focus on, even though we have discussed it somewhat. And 7, we've talked a little bit, we've alluded to that a little bit, but for us to ask the question and get better direction from you would be helpful.
The 2 items are not very long.
I'm afraid that number 9 is going to be really long, though.
Okay. Yeah, okay.
Let's have a 5-minute break, and then we convene after that.
Here it goes.
Must be like from the break.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone who's still waiting around. So the next item is really the threshold of physical design change from original approval that warrants public review. We've already started talking about that, and that's really the cases where we're dealing with an applicant that has made some changes during construction, that we're at a place where we think they have deviated too much from. So I think we've gotten a lot of feedback from you. If there's anything else you'd like to say, I think having the authority to bring something back without an application fee, that would help. And we can come back with a recommendation if we think the changes are actually positive. And in some cases, we have seen those, but we think they're still significant enough that either a design review board member or a community member might think this is not what I saw approved. What happened? What did staff do? So in those cases, we think it's just warranted for us to at least bring a visit.
Do we have any comments about that?
No.
That's a good idea.
Okay, next item up is the implementation of the Design Review Board approval during construction. Design Review Board does not end whether at the approval stage. Obviously, it continues. And the way that we ensure that your comments, conditions, and considerations have been applied is during the Design Review Board final inspection and framing inspection. Now, for single-family homes, there are two inspections. One is at the framing stage. This Design Review Board framing inspection comes before the building framing sign-off. So unless the city staff who goes out to inspect takes a look and sees that it's in compliance with setbacks, windows actually need to be in, door openings need to be done, balconies need to be framed out. Only when the Design Review Board has signed off on Design Review Board framing for single-family homes is the building then allowed to take a look at the framing and sign off at the framing stage. The last time that city staff, or I should say planning staff, sees it is at the final Design Review Board stage. And this would be for both single-family homes as well as commercial. And I should also include multifamily residential. At the Design Review Board final inspection stage, the planner goes out, we have our set of plans, we take a look at pretty much everything that the Design Review Board took a look at, and that would include landscaping, hardscape, would include exterior colors, exterior finishes, any type of ornamental details that might have been approved by and reviewed and approved by the Design Review Board. Design Review Board staff cannot sign off on the Design Review Board final inspection unless the project complies with the Design Review Board approved set of plans. Okay? Only after the Design Review Board final inspection has been approved by planning staff can then the building department proceed with their Design Review Board final. So if there's any hesitancy or question as to, it's not going to be how is your ultimate record of decision going to be carried out? Well, it's through the inspection process. And again, for single-family homes, there are two stages. One would be framing and final, and then for multifamily and commercial, it would be at the final inspection stage. Does the board have any questions?
Do we have any comments?
Why on the commercials do you not do the framing also? Is
that would be, typically that's just been our policy. Usually the building inspectors, the combination building inspectors have caught pretty much everything at that point in time. Again, if the project is not in compliance, let's say they change the windows or they change the colors or any other type of Design Review Board items that have been approved, we would then take a look at it and not be able to pass the Design Review Board final.
The other reason is that we get different performances.
Right.
Oftentimes, usually with single-family homes, you might get the owner saying, "Oh, I would like to make this change and that change." With commercial projects, or multifamily projects, we often do not run into the same thing. A lot of changes at the whim of the owner sometimes that happen, and that to us they're significant, and maybe to the owner they're not as significant.
Right.
Go ahead.
About 6 years ago, we took a tour.
Sorry.
About 6 years ago, we took a tour to see how the process was going, and we observed a couple things. And one of them couple things were how critical the quality of the windows and doors were for a project. And we're very much aware of that when we're reviewing the process. Having said that, do you think that it would be good to have one more step between framing and final, that when the windows and doors are set, which come after the framing inspection is approved, to say, these are the windows, these are the doors that were approved, because there's so much variety of elements out there. And again, always thinking about having the applicant and the homeowner not waste time. For somebody, that little mullion may not be that important if it was that big. So in the spirit of trying to keep the project moving, could that be one more step to put in before the final DRB inspection or approval review?
At the design review board framing stage, we do take a look and make sure that the windows have already been installed.
I think they have to be
They
installed.
have to be installed at that point in time. And then we also take a look at the recess. So those would be the two criteria that the design review board planning staff look at in order to sign off on the DRB
So
framing.
are you saying that in the process, before the building and safety can come out and sign off their rough framing, doors and windows have to be installed?
Yes.
Never mind. Okay.
But that doesn't have it with the commercial, though, right?
No, because, again, there is no design review board framing stage for commercial and multifamily residential.
Then again, for the same reason, commercial projects don't tend, for example, to switch out windows halfway the
And
same
when you
way.
say
that-
commercial, does that include multifamily, which are, for me, commercial because you're generating an income, or is multifamily part of single-family review?
No, multifamily is its own distinct category, and it would be multifamily and commercial. Those
Only have
categories
one.
only have one final design review board inspection,
So what
not a
happens,
framing inspection.
I'm sorry, are you done? Let's say that, they put a few windows in the wrong place, and the plaster's already in, waterproofing membrane, all that. How do they rip it out?
Well, we've had individuals that have either put in the wrong windows,
Right.
they have altered window locations, and this is when they come in either with an as-built drawing and staff evaluates what did DRB approve versus what is out there right now in the field. If we can honestly say that this is just a very small, insignificant change, such as, the relocation, and it doesn't affect the elevation that the design review board approved, we have the administrative authority to go ahead and allow them to continue and approve the design review board framing. But if it's a significant change, that would be above and beyond the threshold, and we would either require that we would not be able to sign off on the design review board framing and require them to actually comply with what was approved, or sometimes we've had them come back and go back to the design review board.
Yeah, and we have asked them to change back things that
Yes.
were not put in appropriately, and they have argued and
won't get to sign off.
disagreed, and in the end they have changed it. Because believe us, when we say we'll take you back to the design review board, that works very well.
It does. Yeah,
Let
and
me
they
pose
just
a question to you.
Yeah.
In the realm, sort of the issues that we've been dealing with regarding, I guess, the discrepancy between the approved DRB plans and what they actually build on, in more of a residential situation. I guess I'm not advocating an additional sort of sign-off by planning, but if there was one after foundation, would some of those issues been caught?
Probably not.
I know. It's on a...
It's hard to tell because sometimes, sometimes yes, sometimes no. So we could, that's something we could consider. But at this point, enough changes happen after that during the course of construction, sometimes they correct themselves.
It also would be, to your question, it would be very difficult to pinpoint when would be the best time to come visit. So what we are doing as we work with inspection staff is to develop for them a list of hot button issues, because they do go out much more often. check the heights, all the floor-to-floor heights, which right now is not really part of their purview, but they're happy to do that. That's something that we've already run by them. Location and installation of windows is something that we check. It's not really something that can be checked prior to framing inspection. But the floor-to-floor heights, I think, are really the thing that is key. And perhaps the thickness of the walls. If there has been an issue about what size the framing is for recess, as has come up, and if we have a section, for instance, where there is a requirement for a larger framing member than we usually use, we can call that out to a building inspector.
Okay. Thank you.
I briefly discussed this with staff the other day, but since new construction requires new landscaping, and we would review a plan and make comments and approve that plan, is there a better way to justify or to make sure that the landscaping that is signed off on is the landscaping that's on the plan, since it's become a big issue with water conservation and drought-tolerant plantings? And I'm coming from seeing a lot of new construction, looking at the plans, and what's implemented or what's installed is not what's on the plans. And so is there a way to refine that a little bit?
Yeah, you raised this point to us very recently, and it's a very good point. And I don't really have an answer yet. I mean, some ideas we could talk about is maybe having the landscape architect supply photographs of what it's supposed to look like, so that the planners don't have to be, botanists.
I just bring it up as something to think.
But I mean, it is. You raise an excellent point. We're putting some thought into how to deal with that, because the city is going to declare, or may declare, a water emergency and restrict the types of plants that can be planted, which makes this even more crucial.
Well, I think it's also important that when you do a new building, that the landscape is a complement to that structure, and if it comes in something totally different, it doesn't look good on any end here.
If you would like us to start to consider actually asking for some sort of similar to the materials board, a board of photographs, such as Tim said, that might
That's a good
be something that we could add to the application packet.
That would help me a lot. Yeah, look, because I'm not a landscaper, but looking at the design, you kind of see trees and plants, but I know some, but what do they actually look like? I've seen that on some of the commercial projects where they have done that, and it actually is really helpful.
But I think it would also help staff
Sure.
in
Sure.
doing the final walkthrough.
Yeah.
Especially if they put they're calling out for, a box, and then they put in a 5-gallon, right?
I didn't hear what you said.
If they call for a bigger size plant, and when you go and inspect it, they put in a little 5-gallon.
They just put in root-bound bigger plants.
Right.
The ones that never tend to grow.
Yeah.
I think I got one of those ones.
I think we can move forward.
All right.
So now we're at the additional comments, discussion points, if there's anything else that you would like to raise prior to the additional public comment.
Well, I think, Simone, if you have anything, we can start with you, and then we'll just kind of work our way around.
Oh, I think we've had a very meaningful conversation. I was not expecting this kind of a dialogue. I thought it was going to be a quick hour and a half dialogue that turned into something a little more meaningful. And I got a few things out of it that I had not even thought about before, and I had learned some new things as far as the process. And so I think it was worthwhile. I think we've, in a great amount of detail, have gone into these items, so I don't want to beat the dead horse any more than it has to. So I think staff has already gotten my feedback on all the items that have been discussed. So it was very worthwhile.
Thank you.
No, I would agree too. I was just sitting here and thinking, I think I just went through advanced paratroop training, but they're going to push Judy out of the airplane instead of me, so you guys...
You were saved by the bell.
Yeah, I'm ready to go behind you if you need help. No, actually, it's very good, I think he did it, because the questions that you were asking, and I think things that came up here are all things that I kind of have, oh yeah, that's a good idea, or a good question, so I would encourage you doing it more often, or on an annual basis.
And also know that we're always open to your suggestions at any time.
I have your email, Miss Wright. So don't worry about it.
You asked for it.
Son, you do want to? Okay. Oh, just ditto. I tell you, it continues to reinforce how competent and skillful staff has always been in the years that I've been here, and an example of how they've adapted to the change that just changed barely a year ago, and to do a complete office, revision and perspective and policy is not an easy thing, and you guys to be commended. You've done really a great job, and at the same time run an office. So you guys continue to do a good job.
I'll just say I agree with everything everybody said, and I learned a lot with this, and it'll hopefully help me work with the board, because you've come a long way, baby.
That's a good compliment.
Point. Because that's a good way to close. Because I remember there were some board members from the very beginning when the board started that sometimes I get comments from them, and now that they watch the board, we take quite a bit of time reviewing project. The comments I guess, we used to review a case and it would take us 5 minutes because it was the beginning and things were getting sort of shaped, and now we take 45 minutes, sometimes maybe an hour, and that to me is a good sign that the process has evolved, and the city and the staff is doing all the right things. So I just wanted to compliment everyone and my board as well for being such a pleasure to come to and debate work. So I'm quite pleased.
I too want to commend the staff. I think they've done a great job, and we just have to remember that even though we're up here sort of doing all this, it's only possible because of the staff and all the work that they put in and all the arrows that they take for the city and for the board, and so we thank you for that. The one thing that I kind of wanted to just ask about was the 50% rule. We need to really get that defined and get that, because I still struggle with that, and I'm still kind of angered sometimes by it, and so we need to, I guess, get better clarification and sort of how we're going to deal with that. So,
I think Tim mentioned that. Actually, we took that clarification to the City Council, and the City Council basically made it very clear that the 50% rule, if broken, all the codes apply, and there is no other procedure to...
But what about who polices it and all that stuff?
Okay, are you concerned about how it gets policed during construction, or at the time that you're reviewing
Building
the
and safety
report?
sort of says that it's planning's issue. They need to figure that out, kind of thing, and they sort of just run with it. And
Yeah, I mean, it is true that at the time that plans are approved, we should be reviewing the demolition plan. The planner should be reviewing the demolition plan to ensure that it doesn't go over, what was previously proposed, or it certainly doesn't come to any new threshold. In the field, I can't answer for certain how the inspection goes.
I can tell you that in recent months, building and safety staff have been quite vigilant, and they have actually brought to our attention cases where the demolition should not have gone beyond 50, should have been at 35% or such, and then they actually were very good at immediately taking photographs and bringing them to the case planner, and the case planner notified us, and then we put a stop work order, and so they have been a lot more cooperative about that. It's not that they were not cooperative, but they're actually now aware of it in a way that the second they notice something, they'll do let us know.
That's good to hear. Okay, thank you.
May I make a comment? I think also any project that's at 48, 45, right at the limit ought to have a much closer examination, because they're really trying to cutting it a little close.
And in that same thing, over the years we've seen a couple projects that when you ask the designer, the architect, the homeowner, the builder, how are they going to execute what they say or think they're going to do within below the 50% rule, it doesn't make sense. You know, you have a raised foundation, and you're going to put an adjacent slab foundation and carry the studs with, it doesn't make sense. And staff has always been like, yeah, we'll watch it, and you do, I think, but we miss it at that point. For me, if it doesn't make sense on paper, when it goes out in the physical world, it's even more difficult to execute something that just is going to be a harebrained attempt at something we just know is not a problem. And we try to warn people.
Yeah.
You're not. This is going to be a tough one for you to.
Yeah, and before it does come to you, we are doing our best to be more vigilant and to make sure that we have those calculations. In the past, we didn't always have those calculations. And also, you know, if it can't pass the smell test, like,
Yes.
you know, how can you really add this without removing portion of it?
Good point. Maybe a suggestion could be, if one is smelling a little bit interesting, you know, let's grab one of the building officials. They get back to the office at 4:30. Let's bring them over here for a quick 5 minutes and say, how do you see this? And often when they hear from a building official who they may see 3 months from now, it may be a little bit of the wake up and smell the coffee.
That's a very good suggestion. And the other thing that we have been doing, we assure you, is to say, you know, if we see 48%, we say, you know, that's really not going to work well for you. Cut it back, because you will need that flexibility when you get on site. So we do our best to raise all those red flags before it comes to you, and we're doing our best to be even more vigilant.
Okay, thank you. I think before we wrap up, we have 2 more cards, and they've patiently waited for us. So maybe we could have Larry Varnes please come up and state your name and address for the record, and thank you for being so patient.
Welcome. Interesting process. I'm Larry Varnes. I'm president of the Chevy Chase Homeowners Estates Association. I spoke actually before the first study session as well, and persevered the late night there as well. But I think it's important, and I want to thank you as a board. I want to thank you as a staff for all of the hard work you do, because I know that an awful lot goes into this, that those of us who watch Channel 6 or those of us who see the outcome in our neighborhoods really can't appreciate the level of expertise and the level of commitment that is put forth by both the Design Review Board itself and staff. So we thank you very much in that. I won't repeat what I said at the first study session, because it's all on tape, and I know that notes were taken. I really do agree with the 3 other homeowner association presidents who spoke to you already this evening. I thought they raised very good and valid points. I would say that indeed part of the issue about it's easier to seek forgiveness after the fact. I think if you put in big red letters on the approval of the plan, that any deviation will be brought before city attorney, and that you run the risk of having that construction torn down. And I think if you make it very clear, it might put the fear of God in terms of some of the builders and some of the developers. So I think that, again, some of the noticing on the initial plans can solve that point. What I do want to talk about in the time that I do have, though, is that about 95% of the discussion tonight has been around the applicant. Has been around how does the applicant go through 1 design review board, 2 design review boards, is it 3rd, is it minor changes, is it what? It is important to me, it's important to our association, and important to our neighbors that indeed we take into consideration the community and neighborhood compatibility. And I really urge you to take that as much into consideration as the design of the property itself. Because the design of the property in a vacuum is one thing. As it sits with the neighbors, it's quite another thing. And in fact, we did prevail in the appeal of your decision, actually, up on Buckingham Place, because we felt that it did not go far enough to take into consideration the neighborhood. And so as we come back as an association and work with you to get good quality designs through, I would urge you to take into consideration the specific neighbors. As you have one-on-one conversations with the applicant, have one-on-one conversations with the two immediate neighbors, because they're the people who are going to be most likely impacted. And make sure where there is a problem case, that indeed the specific problems that can be anticipated are worked through prior to you spending so much time in the design of the building itself, and put it into context with what's around it. So I thank you again for all of your hard work. And again, as you would suspect, I represent the neighborhoods, and so that you would expect that that would be my position as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Can I make a comment since I'm leaving? I can easily do that. I was on that panel in the House that was appealed on Tuesday, and one of my major concerns on every meeting that we had was, are the neighbors here? Do they have an input? Or does the homeowners association? And as I remember, the only person here was the neighbor who did eventually appeal that. There was no input. So I would encourage you, and I would encourage the public to be watching this. You know, if they have an issue, either send a letter, send an email, come down and meet us, because that really makes a difference.
Somehow that one slipped through the cracks. Don't know why.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The last card that I have is Mike Myers. If you could please come up. Name and address for the record.
Thank you. My name is Mike Myers. I live at 911 Kilmary Lane. I'm a director of the Royal Canyon Property Owners Association, but my views are my own, not the association. I heard a lot of discussion about what happens when a approved design project really gets off the tracks. And I think one has happened in our neighborhood. I frankly don't care whether the city planning staff brings them before the design review board to be chewed on in a third meeting, or whether he's taken directly to the city attorney. If a design has been approved in the size that's consistent with the neighborhood, and for whatever reason, the owner and the contractor decide they'll just do what they want. There are kids that speed at 90 miles an hour down Glen Oaks Avenue, which concerns the police. There's also a contractor or homeowner who will take advantage of an approval and then just go do what he wants. That simply needs to be stopped, whatever the mechanism is. The other thing is that we've had an example up on Majestic of a house that was designed completely out of scale of the neighborhood, and the design review board said no. But one of the factors in looking at scale is people put up 2x4s on the roof of the building to show what the scale of the project is. Then you guys say, no, you can't do it, you reject it, and then the doggone 2x4s stay up on the roof for a couple of months. I don't know what the mechanism is, but if you turn a house down as too big in scale, tell them to take the 2x4s down. That's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Quick question on that Majestic property. Was that the one at the corner? You know the address of it?
Well, the Arbolas project is on the corner. The Majestic one is in the middle of the street, in the middle of a short block.
But not the corner one.
It has a little side street, so it is
okay.
a
That's
corner.
the one I'm thinking
side
of.
street. But yeah, it's a problem. We have other 2x4s up in the neighborhood now on other projects. So take them down.
Well, that's a dangerous issue, too, if something happens to fall or something. So, thank you. Do we have anything else that we'd like to discuss or talk about before we wrap up?
Yeah, so to wrap up, we would like to thank you and all the time you put in and all the energy you put into giving us this feedback. This is extremely useful, and we appreciate it tremendously. What we're going to do next is that we're going to compile the comments we received tonight and the comments we received the previous in the previous study session to the City Council, and we'll keep you posted on what comes out of that. You will hear firsthand. Thank you very much, and we appreciate everything.
Thank you.
I move we adjourn.
We have minutes to approve.
Yes.
Oh.
Would you like to continue the minutes to the next meeting?
Yes.
All right, thanks.
Last date, he's so ready.
A motion to adjourn at 8:20. Thank you very much.